Good evening, and welcome to the Sleepy Geographer. If you are here to slow down, settle in, and let your mind wander gently across the world's landscapes as you drift towards sleep, you're in the right place. Tonight's journey takes us into a hidden world, landscapes sculpted not by fire or ice, but by the patient work of water and stone. These are places of silence and depth, where rivers vanish beneath the ground, caves stretch like vast cathedrals in darkness, and towers of limestone rise like forgotten monuments. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? It's always fascinating to see the little map that forms in the comments. If you find yourself unwinding with this video, I'd be grateful if you gave it a like and subscribed for more quiet journeys into the earth. And to those of you already subscribed, thank you for supporting this growing corner of calm curiosity. I hope this video doesn't prove so interesting that it keeps you awake. But if it does, then at least you'll drift into sleep with a head full of caves, rivers, and strange stone forests. There are worse things to dream about. So what exactly are these silent landscapes beneath our feet? And why have they inspired both awe and myth since the earliest days of human history? To understand them, we must begin with the most patient sculpture on earth, water. It seems gentle, soft, and fleeting, yet over thousands upon thousands of years it reshapes mountains, hollows out valleys, and even carves entire worlds underground. Where limestone meets rain, and where time stretches endlessly, the surface of the earth becomes riddled with secret chambers, hidden passages, and sinkholes that open like sudden doors to the depths. These landscapes are not rare curiosities tucked away in far-off corners of the planet. They cover nearly 1/5 of the Earth's land surface and provide drinking water to hundreds of millions of people. Yet despite their vast importance, they remain strangely elusive. Much of their grandeur is hidden from view, lying beneath forests, fields, or seas of grass. They are landscapes that ask us to imagine what lies under the soles of our shoes. But this is not just a story of geology. It is also a story of life, of blind fish that navigate in total darkness, of bats that spiral through caverns, and of humans who once painted, prayed, and buried their dead in the echoes of dripping stone. It is a story of danger too, of houses swallowed by sinkholes, of wells poisoned by unseen waters, and of farmers who learn to live with soil that is thin and unforgiving. At the same time, these places are settings for wonder. The glittering stalactites and stone curtains of great caves resemble palaces beyond the reach of architects. Towering limestone pillars, rising out of misty valleys, have inspired painters, poets, and storytellers for centuries. And in many cultures, these landscapes became the stage for myths of the underworld, entrances to realms of gods, spirits, and ancestors. In this journey, we will wander slowly through these stone labyrinths and silent forests. We will trace the path of a single drop of rain as it becomes an underground river, explore vast caverns that once sheltered civilizations, and reflect on the fragile balance that makes these landscapes both beautiful and precarious. So as you let yourself drift, think of this. If so much of the world lies unseen beneath our feet, what other hidden realms might the earth be holding in silence? When we speak of landscapes, most people picture rolling hills, tall mountains, or great rivers winding across valleys. Yet there exists another type of geography that is less obvious, often hidden, and shaped not by violent eruptions or glaciers, but by the quiet persistence of water wearing down stone. This is Karst, a name that might sound unfamiliar, though the features it describes are some of the most dramatic and mysterious on Earth. The word itself comes from a region straddling Italy and Slovenia, where limestone dominates the ground and has long fascinated geographers. Over time, the term karst expanded to cover any place where soluble rocks such as limestone, gypsum, or dolomite have been sculpted by water into intricate shapes. Imagine a landscape where rivers vanish suddenly into the earth, where sinkholes yawn open overnight, and where underground caverns stretch for miles in echoing silence. That is the essence of Karst. Unlike most terrains, which are defined by what you see on the surface, Karst is defined just as much by what lies beneath. Its true character is subterranean. Rainwater, slightly acidic from mingling with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and soil, seeps into cracks in limestone. Over centuries, that faint acidity dissolves the rock grain by grain, enlarging cracks into fissures, fissures into tunnels, and tunnels into vast chambers. What begins as invisible chemistry eventually sculpts entire worlds of stone. One striking feature of karst landscapes is their unpredictability. A surface that appears flat and stable may hide labyrinths of hollow rock beneath. Wells may run dry without warning because water has found a new underground route. Whole streams can vanish, diving into the earth, only to reappear as powerful springs miles away. Farmers living on karst land often joke that their fields are full of surprises, though the surprises can be dangerous as well as amusing. Sinkholes are perhaps the most famous hallmark of karst. These depressions, ranging from a few meters across to giant craters large enough to swallow buildings, form when the roof of an underground cavity collapses. In Florida, a house once slid into a sinkhole that opened beneath a bedroom. In China, massive dolines, sinkholes so huge they resemble natural amphitheatres, can be hundreds of meters deep, with their own microclimates and miniature forests at the bottom. They remind us that karst is as dramatic as it is subtle. Yet karst is not only about collapse and emptiness, it is also about creation. Within caves, the slow drip of mineral-rich water builds stalactites and stalagmites. These formations, growing only a few centimeters every century, decorate cavern ceilings and floors like frozen waterfalls or inverted forests of stone. In some caves, entire chambers are filled with delicate curtains of calcite that shimmer in lamplight, as though nature itself had carved a palace from crystal. Beyond caves and sinkholes, karst produces landscapes of startling beauty on the surface. In southern China's Guangxi province, jagged limestone towers rise dramatically from green valleys, forming the scenery of Guilin that has inspired countless poets and painters. In Madagascar, the Singui de Bemaraha presents a forest of knife-sharp limestone pinnacles, so dense that walking through it feels like navigating a petrified sea. These surface forms are as much a part of karst as the hidden rivers below, proving that this type of geography is both inward and outward, subterranean and skyward. Karst is also defined by its water. Unlike rivers that flow visibly across plains or mountains, karst waters often vanish into swallow holes and resurface far away as springs. This makes karst hydrology puzzling, even today. A stream may disappear beneath your feet, leaving the ground above dry, while underground it rushes through caverns large enough to swallow trains. Early explorers often tried to trace these hidden rivers by tossing floating objects such as wood chips, or even marked ducks into sinkholes and waiting to see where they reappeared downstream. Modern science uses dyes and sensors, but the mystery remains enchanting. In terms of scale, karst is far from rare. It covers around 20% of the world's dry land. Large parts of Europe, North America, China, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East are underlain by soluble rock that produces karst landscapes. These areas often provide vital water supplies, since the porous limestone acts like a sponge. Springs emerging from karst aquifers have supported towns and farms for thousands of years. But this abundance comes with a catch. Because water moves quickly through the cracks, karst aquifers are vulnerable to pollution. A single spill on the surface can contaminate wells miles away. The importance of karst extends far beyond geology. For countless generations, people have used caves as shelters, burial grounds, and sacred places. Some of the earliest human artworks were painted deep inside karst caverns, where flickering torchlight cast shadows on dripping walls. These spaces feel otherworldly, half natural and half supernatural, and they have always stirred human imagination. In myths, caves often represent gateways to the underworld, entrances to realms beyond ordinary life. Karst also shapes how people live on the land. Thin soils over limestone mean farming is difficult, so communities often develop creative ways to cultivate crops in patches of fertile ground. Where water vanishes into sinkholes, farmers must learn to adapt or risk losing entire fields to sudden floods or collapses. Roads and houses built on karst require special care, since the hidden voids below can shift without warning. This constant interplay of opportunity and risk defines life in these regions. Although karst is global, each region presents its own character. In the Balkans, where the term was first coined, rolling limestone plateaus are dotted with sinkholes and caves, creating a landscape both rugged and beautiful. In the United States, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky stretches for more than 600 kilometers of mapped passageways, making it the longest known cave system in the world. In Vietnam's Ha Long Bay, limestone towers rise from the sea, shrouded in mist. The diversity of karst is immense, yet all these places share the same origin: stone dissolved by water, shaped by time. In the end, what defines karst most clearly is its duality. It is both presence and absence, stone and void, surface and underground. It is solid rock sculpted into fragility, landscapes that seem firm yet can vanish beneath your feet. It is also a reminder of patience. No human hand chisels these caverns, no dramatic eruption or earthquake creates them overnight. Instead, karst is formed by countless drops of rain, working silently across millennia. To define karst, then, is to recognize a geography that is hidden in plain sight. It is the world beneath the world, a network of stone and water that reveals how even the gentlest forces can reshape the earth. These landscapes may seem mysterious, but they follow simple rules of chemistry and time, and yet for all the science we can bring to bear, they remain places of wonder, places where geology and imagination meet, where silence reigns, and where the earth quietly tells its deepest stories. If karst landscapes are the stage, then water is both the playwright and the patient builder of the set. The forces that shape these places are subtle, but relentless, unfolding over spans of time so vast that human lifetimes appear as flickers in comparison. To understand karst, you must picture not sudden cataclysms, but instead the slow chemistry of rain, the quiet persistence of gravity, and the unseen work of living organisms. At the heart of it all lies the chemical dance between water and stone. Rainwater, as pure as it seems when it falls from the sky, is never entirely neutral. As it passes through the atmosphere, it picks up carbon dioxide, and when it trickles through soils rich in decaying plant matter, it gathers even more. The result is a weak carbonic acid, gentle enough to be safe to drink, but just corrosive enough to nibble away at limestone, dolomite, and gypsum. This mild acidification is nature's secret tool, allowing every drop of water to dissolve a microscopic grain of rock. One drop achieves nothing, but billions of drops over thousands upon thousands of years carve caverns large enough to fly a plane through. Geology sets the stage by providing rocks that are particularly vulnerable to this process. Limestone, made primarily of calcium carbonate, is the most common. It is often formed from the shells and skeletons of marine organisms that settled on ancient sea floors. Over millions of years, those sediments were compacted and lifted by tectonic forces until they formed mountain chains or plateaus. What began as coral reefs and shallow seas eventually became towering cliffs and expansive limestone plains, primed to be sculpted by rain. Dolomite, a cousin of limestone with magnesium in its structure, behaves similarly, though it resists dissolution a little more. Gypsum, a softer mineral, dissolves even faster, producing karst features at a brisker pace. The process of shaping karst is not confined to the surface. Cracks in rock, called joints, provide pathways for water to infiltrate. At first, these cracks are hairline fractures, invisible to the eye. As water seeps in, the edges dissolve, widening the gap. Over centuries, those cracks become channels. Over millennia, channels become caves. Eventually, entire networks of underground rivers form, linking sinkholes and springs in an intricate plumbing system that ignores the neat boundaries of the surface landscape. Unlike rivers that obediently flow downhill across valleys, karst waters twist and vanish, reappearing where they are least expected. Climate plays a decisive role in how quickly these processes occur. In warm, wet regions, abundant rainfall and high levels of soil carbon dioxide accelerate dissolution, producing dramatic karst topography such as the soaring towers of southern China or the jagged pinnacles of Madagascar. In colder climates, the process slows, though it does not stop. Even the gentlest trickle of meltwater from snow can carry enough acidity to sculpt stone. In arid regions where rain is infrequent, karst still develops, but the features tend to be more subtle, often hidden underground rather than expressed in towering cliffs. Temperature also matters. Higher temperatures allow chemical reactions to occur more quickly, so tropical environments produce karst at a faster rate than their polar counterparts. This is why some of the most spectacular karst formations are found in humid zones near the equator, where warmth, rain, and abundant vegetation combine to speed up dissolution. Speaking of vegetation, biology is more involved in shaping karst than one might guess. Plants and microorganisms in the soil exhale carbon dioxide as they respire, adding to the acidity of infiltrating water. Root systems penetrate cracks, channeling moisture downward and occasionally prying the rock apart with mechanical force. Certain bacteria and fungi even play a role in mineral dissolution, contributing their own biochemical signatures to the underground world. In this way, forests above ground are silently collaborating with the hidden caverns below. Over time, these forces produce an unusual layering of landscapes. On the surface, fields may look ordinary, dotted with shrubs or grazing animals. Beneath, however, vast voids may extend in all directions. This duality creates instability. Gravity is always waiting for the moment when ceilings of underground chambers grow too thin to support the weight above. When that moment arrives, the ground gives way, creating sinkholes. From small depressions to immense dolines, these collapses are dramatic reminders that water and chemistry have been working in secret all along. The shaping of karst also owes much to hydrology, the study of how water moves. Unlike in non-karst terrains, where rivers follow predictable courses, water in soluble rock can plunge straight down into fissures. Once underground, it often flows under pressure, creating powerful springs that gush forth at valley floors. These springs are more than scenic. They are crucial water sources for entire regions. The unpredictability of these flows, however, has challenged communities for centuries, forcing them to adapt to landscapes where rivers vanish without warning. Another key force is time itself. Human impatience makes it tempting to imagine dramatic change, but karst is the geography of patience. A single stalactite may take hundreds of years to grow just 1 centimetre. A cave system like Mammoth Cave in Kentucky required millions of years of steady dissolution. The grandeur of karst is a reminder that Earth does not rush. It sculpts with persistence rather than violence. There are also mechanical forces at play. Once cracks and voids are established, water flowing through them begins to erode by abrasion as well as dissolution. Pebbles and sediments carried by underground rivers grind away at the rock, smoothing passageways and enlarging caverns. In flood conditions, the erosive power of these hidden rivers can be immense, moving boulders and reshaping underground galleries in ways unseen by the surface world. In coastal karst, yet another force joins the story, the sea. Where limestone meets salt water, waves gnaw at cliffs while tidal fluctuations pump water in and out of fissures, enhancing dissolution. Over long stretches of time, coastal karst can produce sea caves, arches and stacks, merging the work of ocean and rain into hybrid landscapes that feel both terrestrial and marine. Taken together, these processes create a geography unlike any other. It is a world sculpted by acidity so mild it barely registers on the tongue, guided by the slow tug of gravity, enriched by the respiration of roots and microbes, and recorded in the architecture of stone. What makes Karst so compelling is not that any single force is extraordinary, but that the ordinary powers of nature, water, air, life, and time, converge in one place to produce extraordinary results. It is tempting to think of landscapes as static backdrops, but Karst reminds us that the earth is always in motion, even when we cannot see it. Beneath every grassy meadow or forested hillside underlain by limestone, a hidden transformation is unfolding grain by grain. Over spans of time longer than human history, that transformation produces caverns, towers, springs, and sinkholes. These are the fingerprints of forces that rarely announce themselves yet never rest. The shaping of Karst is thus an act of quiet persistence. It shows us that power does not always roar or explode. Sometimes it whispers, and in those whispers of dissolving stone and dripping water, entire landscapes of silence and mystery are born. To understand Karst, you must picture an endless conversation between water and stone. Unlike rivers that carve their valleys openly for all to see, this dialogue happens both on the surface and in secret chambers below ground. It is not a quick argument, but a slow and patient exchange, where every drop of rain negotiates with limestone, dolomite, or gypsum, persuading them to give up a little of their substance. Over centuries, that gentle interaction becomes one of the most transformative forces in the natural world. Water begins its work in the sky, gathering carbon dioxide as it falls through the atmosphere. By the time raindrops touch the earth, they already contain a trace of acidity. As they sink into soils thick with roots and microorganisms, they absorb even more carbon dioxide, making them slightly more corrosive. What seems to us like fresh, pure rain is actually a tiny, mobile sculptor equipped with just enough chemical bite to dissolve rock. When this water trickles into the fractures of limestone, something remarkable begins. The calcium carbonate that makes up the stone reacts with carbonic acid, forming calcium bicarbonate, a substance easily carried away in solution. In simple terms, the rock dissolves into invisibility, vanishing grain by grain into the flow of groundwater. This process is so slow that no single drop of water achieves much, but multiplied across millions of years and countless raindrops, it becomes a power that can carve caverns large enough to swallow entire cities. Erosion in karst landscapes is both visible and hidden. On the surface, streams may cut shallow valleys into the stone, only to suddenly vanish down swallow holes, where the current disappears into darkness. Below ground, those same waters may race along channels, chiseling away at the walls not only through chemical dissolution, but also through physical abrasion. Sediment carried by the water acts like sandpaper, grinding smooth curves into the limestone and enlarging fissures into broad tunnels. The interaction between water and rock creates a dynamic system. During dry spells, groundwater may retreat into deep reservoirs, leaving caves silent and still, but during floods, those same caves can fill rapidly with roaring torrents, transforming echoing chambers into underground rivers. This duality means Karst is always shifting. A spring that gushes clear water in spring may be dry by autumn. A pool that looks tranquil one season may surge like a fountain the next. The unpredictability is part of its character. On the surface, the absence of flowing rivers is often just as telling as their presence. In many karst regions, surface streams are scarce because water quickly seeps into the porous ground. Instead of winding across landscapes in broad meanders, rivers vanish into fissures, leaving dry valleys that look like they ought to have streams but do not. These blind valleys end abruptly where the water disappears, swallowed whole by the earth. For early settlers, this was baffling. How could a river simply stop? It gave rise to myths of divine intervention, stories of gods or spirits drinking the water. Today, hydrologists can trace the paths of these hidden flows with dyes and instruments, but the mystery has not entirely faded. The beauty of this interaction is perhaps most visible inside caves, where dripping water builds new features as quickly as it erodes old ones. As drops fall from the ceiling, they lose some of their carbon dioxide, causing dissolved calcium carbonate to reprecipitate as solid stone. Over centuries, this creates stalactites hanging like icicles and stalagmites rising from the floor. When the two meet, they form solid pillars that look like the columns of some forgotten temple. Delicate formations like soda straws, flowstones, and helictites all owe their existence to the same patient exchange between water and rock. It is a reminder that erosion is not only destructive, it is also creative, giving rise to shapes of astonishing intricacy. Another aspect of this water-earth relationship is the way it influences entire landscapes above ground. In regions with thick limestone beds, the ground can collapse into sinkholes when underground cavities grow too large to support the surface. Some of these collapses are minor depressions a few meters wide, while others are so immense they hold entire villages or forests within their depths. In China's Guangxi province, sinkholes hundreds of meters deep form natural amphitheatres with unique ecosystems at the bottom. Each collapse is a visible mark of the hidden erosion that has been unfolding for millennia. In coastal areas, water adds another twist by combining with the sea. Where Karst meets the ocean, waves hammer cliffs while tides push seawater into underground cracks. The mixing of fresh groundwater and salty tides accelerates dissolution, producing sea caves, arches, and even entire bays such as Vietnam's Halong Bay. These landscapes, sculpted jointly by chemical and mechanical forces, show that Karst is not limited to inland plateaus but reaches out into the embrace of the ocean. This constant interplay between water and stone has immense consequences for human life. Springs bursting from karst aquifers often provide communities with vital supplies of drinking water. At the same time, the same porous qualities that make karst aquifers generous also make them vulnerable. Pollution from farms, industry, or households can travel through underground streams with surprising speed, contaminating wells far away. Once again, water's partnership with stone reveals its double-edged nature. It can sustain life or threaten it, depending on how it is treated. The scale of these interactions is difficult to comprehend because they unfold on timescales beyond human experience. A river can cut a valley as tens of thousands of years, but a cave system may require millions. The forces are so patient that they almost defy imagination, yet the evidence is there in every stalactite, every spring, every yawning doline. Standing inside a vast cavern, you're not simply inside a hole in the ground. You're inside the record of countless drops of rain, each one contributing its fraction of work to the masterpiece around you. What makes this process so engaging is its paradoxical character. Water is gentle enough to quench thirst, yet persistent enough to hollow mountains. Limestone seems solid and immovable, yet it yields to the faintest acidity with surprising ease. Together they form a dialogue of strength and fragility, endurance and change. The outcome is a landscape of wonder that feels both eternal and constantly shifting. In the end, the interaction between water and earth in Karst reminds us that the planet's most dramatic transformations often occur quietly. They do not announce themselves with explosions or eruptions, but with the steady drip of water into stone. It is this quiet persistence, multiplied over unthinkable spans of time, that has created the labyrinths, towers, and hidden rivers that define Karst. And though we can explain the chemistry and trace the flows, there remains something poetic in the idea that an entire world can be carved out not by force, but by patience. Karst landscapes are best recognised not by subtle slopes or rolling plains, but by their dramatic forms, features so distinctive that they seem to belong to a different planet. These are the landscapes of sudden voids, jagged pinnacles, and stone forests, shaped by the invisible hand of water working on soluble rock. Each feature tells a story of time and transformation, of chemistry and collapse, and together they form some of the most striking geographies on Earth. Perhaps the most notorious of these forms is the sinkhole. These depressions appear when the roof of an underground cavity gives way, sending the surface tumbling into the void below. Some sinkholes are small, shallow bowls that merely collect rainwater or serve as grazing hollows. Others are vast chasms capable of swallowing buildings or creating entire micro-ecosystems at their base. In parts of Florida, sinkholes are so common that insurance companies treat them as routine hazards. In China, the enormous Tiankeng sinkholes plunge hundreds of meters into the ground, their depths so profound that they shelter forests and rare species hidden from the outside world. A sinkhole is both an end and a beginning, the end of stability above ground and the beginning of a new habitat below. Equally striking are the limestone towers that rise like sentinels from valley floors. These are the results of dissolution that leaves behind isolated blocks of resistant rock, while the surrounding stone erodes away. In southern China, the Karst towers of Guilin and Yangshuo form scenery so iconic that it has been painted, photographed, and celebrated for centuries. Rising like green-clad teeth from a misty plain, they are symbols of endurance in the face of water's patient erosion. In Southeast Asia, similar formations shape the coastlines of Vietnam's Ha Long Bay and Thailand's Phangar Bay, where limestone islands surge from the sea like giant sculptures. These towers are not only geological curiosities, they are cultural treasures, woven into art, poetry, and national identity. Caves, however, remain the most dramatic and enchanting forms of karst. They are cathedrals without architects, created entirely by the slow seep of acidic water through rock. Step inside one, and the outside world vanishes. Stalactites dangle like stone chandeliers, stalagmites rise like frozen flames, and columns connect roof to floor in silent grandeur. Some caves extend for only a few meters, while others stretch across hundreds of kilometers. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky holds the record as the longest known cave system in the world, with more than 600 kilometers of mapped passageways. In Slovenia, the Škocjan caves boast underground canyons so immense that they resemble something from a fantasy tale. These subterranean realms reveal the raw artistry of water, creating spaces that inspire awe and humility in equal measure. Another dramatic expression of karst is the cliff face. Where limestone beds meet rivers or seas, sheer walls rise abruptly, sculpted by both chemical and physical erosion. The White Cliffs of Dover in England, though technically chalk rather than limestone, are a karstic spectacle on the coast, gleaming against the sea like a natural fortress. In the Balkans, steep limestone gorges cut by rivers create landscapes of rugged cliffs and winding canyons. These cliffs stand as bold reminders that karst is not confined to what lies beneath. It also shapes the horizon. One of the most unusual forms is the stone forest, a jagged labyrinth of pinnacles and spires created when dissolution strips away softer rock and leaves behind razor-sharp ridges. Nowhere is this more dramatic than in Madagascar's Tsingy de Bemaraha, where whole regions are covered in limestone blades so sharp and narrow that they are nearly impossible to cross without ropes. This forest of stone is home to rare wildlife and has remained isolated for centuries, a fortress created not by walls but by geology. While karst is most often associated with rock, it also produces landforms that interact with other natural processes. Polyus, for instance, are large flat-bottomed depressions often several kilometers wide, surrounded by steep walls of limestone. They may flood seasonally, turning into temporary lakes before draining back underground. These basins have long been used for farming, their fertile soils contrasting with the thin rocky ground around them. The term itself comes from the Balkans, where polyus dominate the landscape, shaping both livelihoods and settlement patterns. Another distinctive form is the disappearing river. Unlike most waterways that flow consistently across the surface, karst rivers may plunge suddenly into swallow holes, travelling unseen through underground channels before resurfacing at a spring. This creates landscapes of unpredictability, where a valley may hold a river one moment and a dry channel the next. The Ljubljanica River in Slovenia is famous for vanishing and reappearing multiple times along its course, a phenomenon that baffled early observers and inspired local legends. Even the smallest details of karst forms are striking. Delicate soda straws, those slender hollow stalactites, grow drop by drop until they form curtains of translucent stone. Flowstones spread across cave walls in rippling sheets, as if the rock had once flowed like water. In rare cases, crystals and minerals add colour, turning cave chambers into galleries of natural art. Each form is unique, yet all are born from the same interaction of water and soluble stone. The drama of Karst is amplified by its scale. A single sinkhole may be small enough to walk around in minutes, while a cave system may stretch farther than a person could explore in a lifetime. Towering limestone cliffs may dominate a coastline visible from miles away, while delicate cave formations require careful torchlight to reveal their beauty. This range of forms, from the grand to the intricate, makes Karst endlessly captivating. It is also worth remembering that these landscapes are not static. Sinkholes enlarge, caves grow, towers crumble, and rivers change course. The dramatic forms we see today are snapshots in an ongoing process of transformation. What stands as a pinnacle now may collapse into rubble in centuries to come, while new voids are already forming in silence underground. The drama is continuous, though often hidden from view. The richness of karst forms lies in their variety and in their ability to surprise. To walk across a karst plain is to step into uncertainty. The ground may conceal a cavern, the valley may end in a cliff, the river may vanish without warning. Yet this very unpredictability gives the landscape its character. It is a place where nature reveals its artistry in unexpected ways, sculpting forms that defy ordinary expectations of how land should behave, from yawning sinkholes to soaring towers, from labyrinthine caves to forests of stone. The dramatic forms of karst are among the Earth's most remarkable creations. They show that water, though gentle, has the power to carve landscapes of breathtaking scale and beauty. And they remind us that the planet is full of surprises, waiting quietly beneath our feet. Beneath the familiar surface of meadows, forests, and towns lies an entirely different geography, one that most people never see. These are the underground realms of Karst, hidden worlds where rivers run in darkness, chambers echo with the drip of water, and rock formations grow like slow-motion gardens of stone. They are places that defy ordinary experience, for to enter them is to step into another dimension of Earth's story. Caves are the most obvious entry point into this subterranean world. They come in many forms: small grottos that serve as cool shelters from the sun, narrow passageways that snake deep into the earth, and vast caverns large enough to fit skyscrapers. The creation of these spaces begins with a simple crack in the rock, widened over millennia by acidic water. As these fissures enlarge, they connect into networks, eventually becoming full cave systems. Some remain relatively short, while others extend for hundreds of kilometers. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, for example, has more than 600 kilometers of mapped passages, and still more awaiting exploration. It is less a cave than a labyrinth, a stone universe beneath the surface. Inside these hidden spaces, water continues its patient work. Stalactites descend from ceilings, stalagmites rise from floors, and in between them grow all manner of strange formations: delicate soda straws, twisting helictites, broad flowstones that drape across walls like frozen waterfalls. Each feature tells the story of countless drops of water, leaving behind tiny deposits of calcite. The result is a subterranean architecture that rivals anything human engineers could design. To stand in such a chamber is to be reminded that artistry is not confined to the surface world. But caves are not only about beauty, they are also critical components of the planet's plumbing system. Underground rivers and aquifers run through karst like veins, carrying water across great distances before it re-emerges at springs. These aquifers supply drinking water to hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Their complexity, however, makes them difficult to manage. Unlike aquifers in sand or gravel, which filter water slowly, karst aquifers are full of channels that allow water to rush through quickly. This means they can provide abundant water, but also that they are vulnerable to pollution. A contaminant spilled on the surface may travel miles underground in just a few days, emerging far away at a spring that supplies an entire town. The hidden nature of these aquifers makes them both invaluable and fragile. In many places, the underground world is more than stone and water. It is also ice. In regions where karst coincides with cold climates, caves may trap snow and ice, preserving it for centuries. These ice caves are remarkable time capsules, storing records of past climates within their frozen layers. Scientists can study ancient ice preserved underground to understand how temperatures and rainfall changed over thousands of years. In some cases, permafrost interacts with limestone to create unique formations, blending the dynamics of freezing and thawing with the chemistry of dissolution. These frozen realms remind us that hidden landscapes are not uniform but vary dramatically with climate. Life, too, finds ways to adapt to these secret environments. Deep within caves, where sunlight never reaches, organisms evolve remarkable traits. Blind cave fish navigate without eyes, relying on sensitive vibrations to sense their surroundings. Crustaceans, insects, and even salamanders in some regions have adapted to total darkness, pale and ghost-like in appearance. Bats roost in vast colonies, their wings filling caverns with a different kind of motion. In some caves, microbial mats thrive on minerals or sulfur, sustaining ecosystems entirely independent of sunlight. These creatures demonstrate that even the darkest environments can be full of life. Human history has also been shaped by these underground places. For early people, caves offered protection from the elements and predators. They became homes, sanctuaries, and canvases for some of the oldest known art. The painted walls of Chauvet and Lascaux in France show animals that roamed tens of thousands of years ago, immortalized in flickering firelight. Other caves became burial sites, places of ritual, or storerooms for precious goods. Even today, many caves hold religious significance, serving as shrines or pilgrimage destinations. For countless generations, humans have sensed that what lies below is not merely empty space, but something sacred and mysterious. The hidden realms of karst are not always tranquil. They can be dangerous as well. Sudden floods can transform quiet passageways into raging underground rivers. Carbon dioxide trapped in caves can accumulate, suffocating the unwary. Narrow passages and unstable ceilings make exploration risky. Yet despite these hazards, the allure of the underground continues to draw adventurers and scientists alike. The urge to explore beneath our feet seems hardwired into human curiosity, as if the unknown darkness is an irresistible invitation. These realms also challenge our sense of scale. On the surface, distance is measured in kilometers across open ground. Underground, the same distance may require crawling through narrow tunnels, descending vertical shafts, or navigating flooded passages. A map of a large cave system looks more like a tangled web than a straightforward route. The complexity of these networks is astonishing, and even in the 21st century, new passages are still being discovered. Beneath familiar landscapes, there are worlds still unmapped. What makes these hidden places so captivating is the contrast they offer. On the surface, life is governed by sunlight, weather, and the rhythms of day and night. Underground, those rhythms disappear. There is no sunrise, no storm, only the eternal drip of water and the slow growth of stone. Time seems to move differently in such places. You could sit in silence and feel as though the centuries were passing around you. This altered sense of time and space is part of what makes caves and aquifers so compelling. The underground world of karst is not separate from the surface. It is connected in countless ways. Water cycles between the two, Ecosystems depend on both, and human history flows across them. Yet it remains a realm apart, hidden, elusive, and often surprising. To explore it, whether in person or in imagination, is to step into the Earth's own secret chambers, where stone, water, ice, and life combine in ways both delicate and grand. These realms remind us that the world we walk on is only the surface layer of something far deeper and more mysterious. Life has an extraordinary talent for showing up in places where it seems least likely. Karst landscapes, with their thin soils, vanishing rivers, and vast underground voids, might appear inhospitable at first glance. Yet they are home to ecosystems that are not only resilient, but often utterly unique. In these extreme spaces, plants and animals adapt to challenges that would defeat most species, proving once again that nature has a knack for creativity when conditions are harsh. On the surface, life in karst regions contends with rocky terrain and limited fertile soil. Agriculture is difficult because nutrients wash quickly through the porous limestone, leaving little behind for crops. But wild plants take advantage of every crevice. Hardy shrubs, grasses, and drought-tolerant trees establish roots in cracks, where even a thin dusting of soil is collected. In Mediterranean karst, evergreen oaks and junipers cling to rocky slopes, while aromatic herbs like thyme and sage fill the air with their scent. These plants may not have the luxury of deep, rich soils, but they thrive by becoming specialists in scarcity. Animals, too, learn to adapt to the irregular surface. Goats are famously well suited to these rugged environments, able to scramble across jagged limestone in search of sparse vegetation. Shepherds in Greece, the Balkans, and the Middle East have relied on goats for millennia because they can survive where cattle or horses would struggle. Birds of prey, such as eagles and hawks, use limestone cliffs as nesting sites, taking advantage of the vertical terrain to raise their young beyond the reach of most predators. Reptiles like lizards and snakes bask on sun-warmed rocks, slipping into crevices when danger approaches. But it is beneath the surface where life truly enters the realm of the extraordinary. Caves and underground rivers offer some of the most extreme conditions imaginable. Total darkness, limited food, and often scarce oxygen. Yet in these shadowy environments, evolution has produced remarkable adaptations. Blind cave fish are perhaps the most famous residents. Having no need for vision, their eyes have regressed over generations, while other senses have sharpened. They use vibrations in the water to detect movement, navigating as if the cave were mapped out in an invisible sonar. Their pale, almost translucent bodies remind us that evolution is not always about gaining features, but sometimes about letting go of what is no longer useful. Other cave dwellers take a different approach. Crustaceans such as amphipods and crayfish live in subterranean streams, often displaying ghostly whiteness from the absence of pigment. Some salamanders, like the olm of Central Europe, spend their entire lives in darkness. This unusual amphibian, with its pale pinkish skin and feathery gills, can survive for years without food by slowing its metabolism to a crawl. The olm is so unusual that local legends once described it as the offspring of dragons, a fitting myth for such an uncanny creature. Bats are another essential part of these underground worlds. While they do not live exclusively in caves, they rely on them for roosting and hibernation. In some caverns, millions of bats gather in colonies so vast that their nightly flights darken the sky. Guano, the accumulation of bat droppings, becomes a critical resource in these systems. Though it may not sound glamorous, guano provides nutrients that support entire communities of insects, fungi, and microorganisms, creating a food chain in a place otherwise starved of sunlight. In this way, bats act as couriers, bringing the richness of the outside world into the barren depths. Microorganisms themselves deserve recognition as pioneers of extreme spaces. In some caves, bacteria form colonies on rock walls, extracting energy from sulfur, iron, or other minerals rather than sunlight. These microbial communities are tiny but powerful, and they help scientists understand how life might exist in environments far beyond Earth. In fact, researchers studying cave microbes often suggest that if life can survive in such nutrient-poor, dark conditions here, it might also survive on other planets or moons. Karst caves in this sense serve as natural laboratories for astrobiology. In tropical karst regions, where towers and pinnacles rise from the landscape, life clings to vertical surfaces in ways that seem improbable. Plants grow directly on sheer cliffs, their roots finding purchase in tiny cracks. In Madagascar's Tsingy de Bemaraha, limestone blades form a landscape so sharp and fragmented that humans struggle to cross it. Yet lemurs leap effortlessly among the spires, while birds nest in sheltered crannies, and specialized reptiles crawl across the razor-edged stone. What seems impassable to us is simply another habitat for species that evolved alongside it. Water-filled sinkholes, or cenotes, found in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, host yet another array of life. These pools, formed when the roofs of underground caverns collapse, connect to vast aquifer systems below. Some cenotes are open to the sky, supporting fish, amphibians and aquatic plants. Others remain partly enclosed, their waters lit only by shafts of sunlight that penetrate through gaps in the ceiling. These dimly lit ecosystems blend the worlds of surface and subterranean life, creating habitats unlike any other on Earth. Even temporary habitats in Karst are rich with life. Polliers, the large flat-bottomed depressions that flood seasonally, become wetlands teeming with birds, amphibians, and insects during rainy periods. When the water drains back underground, plants sprout quickly in the nutrient-rich soils. This cycle of flood and drought creates a rhythm that sustains diverse communities. For farmers, these polgies can be both a blessing and a challenge. Fertile when dry, risky when inundated. But for wildlife, they provide dynamic habitats that change with the seasons. Extreme spaces also foster human adaptations in surprising ways. Communities living in karst regions have learned to use the biodiversity around them carefully. Traditional medicine often draws from the unique plants that thrive in thin soils. Local diets include species that can survive in the rocky ground or in the waters of underground springs. Folklore too draws inspiration from the creatures of the caves. Bats, blind fish, and strange amphibians often appear in myths as symbols of resilience, mystery, or transformation. What ties all of these examples together is resilience. Life in karst landscapes is not abundant in the way of tropical rainforests or fertile plains. It is sparse, specialized, and often fragile. Yet that very fragility makes it precious. The creatures and plants that survive in such extreme spaces are reminders of how adaptable life can be. They show us that even in places of scarcity and darkness, existence finds a foothold, shaping communities as strange as they are beautiful. In the end, karst biodiversity is a celebration of endurance. It is the pale fish gliding silently in underground rivers, the bat colony that turns a cavern into a bustling metropolis, the shrub rooted in a crack of bare stone, and the lemur leaping through a forest of stone blades. Together they tell a story of survival against odds, of a life thriving not despite difficulty but because of it. These extreme spaces, hidden and dramatic, remind us that nature rarely wastes an opportunity. Wherever there is even the faintest chance of survival, something will seize it and make it home. For all their dramatic cliffs, sinkholes and caves, karst landscapes are perhaps most important for something far less visible: water. In many regions of the world, life depends on the hidden aquifers beneath limestone hills and plateaus. These underground systems store and transport enormous volumes of fresh water, often supplying entire cities. Yet just as they provide abundance, they also create challenges, for karst water behaves in ways that are unpredictable, fragile, and difficult to manage. To live on karst terrain is to engage in a constant balancing act with an environment that can both sustain and betray. The porous nature of limestone means that rainwater seeps into the ground quickly, disappearing from the surface with surprising speed. On flat farmland, this might leave fields dry and rivers scarce, but beneath, the water is flowing through fissures and caves, gathering into vast aquifers. These reservoirs are crucial sources of drinking water. In fact, nearly 1/4 of the global population relies directly on karst aquifers for their daily needs. Springs that emerge at the edges of karst plateaus often gush with clear, cold water that has travelled unseen for miles underground. Such springs have been prized for millennia, serving as the foundation for villages, towns, and cities. Ancient civilizations understood the importance of these waters, even if they did not grasp the chemistry. In the Yucatan Peninsula, the Maya relied on cenotes, sinkholes that connect to underground aquifers, as vital sources of fresh water in an otherwise dry landscape. These pools were not only practical but sacred, revered as portals to the underworld. In the Mediterranean, karst springs sustained settlements where surface rivers were absent. The Greeks and Romans tapped into these sources, sometimes constructing elaborate aqueducts to carry the water to distant communities. Even today, many of Europe's cities, from Vienna to Rome, still rely heavily on karst-fed springs. Yet the same qualities that make karst aquifers abundant also make them vulnerable. Unlike aquifers in sand or gravel, where water moves slowly and is naturally filtered, karst aquifers allow water to travel rapidly through open channels. This means that any pollution on the surface can find its way into wells and springs far from its origin in a matter of days. Agricultural chemicals, sewage, and industrial waste all move quickly through these systems, leaving little chance for natural purification. For communities that depend on karst water, this fragility requires vigilance. One careless spill can foul the supply for thousands of people. The unpredictability of karst water also complicates farming. In many karst regions, rivers vanish into swallow holes, leaving valleys dry and difficult to irrigate. Fields can flood when underground channels become blocked, only to dry out again when the blockage clears. Farmers often struggle with thin soils and irregular water supplies, forced to adapt with creative solutions. Terracing, cisterns, and reliance on hardy crops are common strategies, but life remains precarious. In places like the Dinaric karst of the Balkans, farmers have learned to expect feast and famine in their fields, depending on the moods of the underground. For modern engineers, karst presents serious headaches. Building reservoirs in karst terrain is notoriously difficult because water leaks way through cracks in the limestone. Dams may hold back a lake, only to discover that the water has vanished into the bedrock. Highways and railways must be carefully planned, for sinkholes can open without warning, undermining the ground beneath. Cities built on karst, such as parts of Florida, face costly battles with subsidence, as buildings and roads sag into voids below. The invisible nature of karst geology means that planners often discover its quirks only when problems arise. Despite these difficulties, people have always sought to harness karst water, because it is too valuable to ignore. Wells have been sunk into aquifers for centuries, sometimes reaching remarkable depths. In some parts of China, villagers constructed intricate systems to tap underground flows, guiding water into irrigation channels that made farming possible on otherwise unforgiving terrain. In the Balkans, springs were captured in stone basins that provided communities with reliable supplies through long summers. Each culture developed its own methods for coaxing water from the hidden veins of limestone. In recent decades, the pressure on karst aquifers has increased dramatically. Population growth, industrialization, and agriculture demand more water than ever before. Over-extraction can lower groundwater levels, causing springs to dry up and caves to collapse. Pollution from fertilizers and urban runoff seeps quickly into the system, threatening not only human health, but also the delicate cave ecosystems that rely on clean water. The very qualities that make karst aquifers efficient suppliers also make them highly sensitive to disturbance. Yet there are success stories. Careful management of karst water can sustain both people and landscapes. In parts of Austria and Slovenia, protection zones around karst springs ensure that forests and grasslands filter rainfall before it enters the aquifer. These regions have some of the cleanest drinking water in Europe, delivered straight to households with minimal treatment. In France, the Fontaine de Vaucluse, a powerful karst spring, is carefully monitored to balance human use with ecological health. These examples show that with respect and foresight, karst can provide for millions without being destroyed. There's also a cultural dimension to this relationship with water. Springs and wells have often been seen as sacred places, endowed with spiritual power because of their life-giving properties. Many folk traditions speak of spirits, or guardians dwelling in springs, perhaps an echo of the recognition that these waters are both mysterious and essential. Festivals, rituals and myths often grew up around them, weaving practical dependence with reverence. In a way, these beliefs were an early form of environmental protection, reminding people to treat their water sources with care. Today, as climate change alters rainfall patterns and increases droughts in many regions, the importance of karst water is only growing. Aquifers that once seemed endless are now under pressure as surface waters dry up. Managing these hidden reserves wisely will be critical for the future. They are both a gift and a responsibility, demanding careful balance between human need and natural limits. To rely on karst water is to live with uncertainty. Springs may gush one season and vanish the next. Sinkholes may appear overnight. Wells may run clear for decades, only to be spoiled by a single accident. Yet this very uncertainty has fostered resilience and ingenuity in the communities that inhabit these landscapes. From ancient cenotes to modern pipelines, from sacred springs to scientific monitoring, humans have learned to adapt, finding ways to thrive alongside an environment that never reveals all its secrets. In the end, karst reminds us that water is not just a resource but a relationship. It flows through the hidden arteries of the earth, connecting surface and depth, past and future, human and non-human alike. To drink from a karst spring is to sip the product of countless drops of rain, filtered through stone and time. It is a reminder that beneath every glass of water lies an entire landscape, one that sustains us even as it keeps much of its story concealed underground. Long before geologists could explain the chemistry of dissolving limestone, or hydrologists could trace the paths of subterranean rivers, ancient peoples were already living with karst landscapes, adapting to their quirks and weaving them into their worldviews. To early civilizations, these places were not abstract geological puzzles, but daily realities, sources of water, shelters from the elements, and entrances into realms of myth. The presence of caves, sinkholes, and unpredictable springs shaped how communities settled, farmed, worshipped, and imagined their place in the cosmos. One of the most striking examples comes from the Maya of the Yucatan Peninsula. In a region with few surface rivers, karst sinkholes known as cenotes were lifelines. These natural wells tapped into the vast aquifer beneath the limestone plain, providing fresh water for cities like Chichen Itza. Without cenotes, urban centres could never have flourished in such an otherwise arid landscape. Yet cenotes were more than practical resources. The Maya believed these deep pools were portals to Xibalba, the underworld. Offerings of jade, gold, and even human sacrifices were cast into their depths, blending necessity with spirituality. For the Maya, water drawn from cenotes was sustenance, but water returned to them was a gift to the gods. In the Mediterranean world, karst springs often served as the nuclei of settlements. Greece, with its rugged limestone mountains, is rich in karst terrain. Ancient communities clustered around strong springs that burst forth from the base of cliffs or valleys, their flow steady enough to supply villages year-round. Delphi, famous as the site of Apollo's oracle, owed its sacred status in part to its location on Mount Parnassus, a karstic massif with abundant springs and caves. Pilgrims who came seeking prophecy encountered not only priests and rituals, but also the tangible power of water gushing from hidden veins of the earth. In such places, geology and divinity became indistinguishable. The Romans, with their talent for engineering, were quick to exploit karst waters. They built aqueducts that carried spring water across vast distances, ensuring reliable supplies for growing cities. The Aqua Claudia, completed in the 1st century AD, tapped Karst springs in the Anio Valley, transporting millions of litres of water to Rome each day. Yet even the Romans struggled with Karst's unpredictability. Rivers that vanished underground or springs that fluctuated seasonally challenged their designs. Still, their determination to master these landscapes left behind aqueducts and cisterns that remain marvels of ingenuity. Further east in China, Karst landscapes inspired not only settlement but also art. The Li River Valley near Guilin, with its dramatic limestone towers, became a celebrated subject for poets and painters. These peaks, shaped by dissolution and erosion, were likened to dragons rising from mist or mountains of celestial origin. Long before Karst was studied scientifically, it was revered aesthetically. Farmers in the region adapted their practices to the narrow valleys between the towers, cultivating rice in soils enriched by seasonal floods. Meanwhile, boatmen navigated the winding river, carrying goods and stories through scenery so distinctive that it still appears on China's currency today. In prehistoric Europe, caves offered refuge from cold climates and wild predators. The famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet are not only masterpieces of early art, but also testaments to how people engaged with karst environments. The deep chambers, echoing and flickering with torchlight, became canvases for animals that roamed the Ice Age plains: bison, horses, lions and mammoths. To step into such a cave was to step into a liminal space, part shelter, part gallery, part temple. These paintings suggest that early peoples did not view caves merely as empty voids, but as powerful places where the natural and supernatural converged. Caves also became burial grounds. Across Europe and the Middle East, human remains have been discovered deep underground, sometimes accompanied by tools or ornaments. To lay the dead in these spaces was to return them to the earth's embrace, perhaps with the belief that the subterranean world was the gateway to another life. In this sense, karst landscapes shaped not only how people lived, but also how they conceived of death and the afterlife. Beyond shelter and ritual, karst influenced daily survival in subtler ways. Thin soils and vanishing rivers meant agriculture was difficult, forcing early communities to innovate. In the Dinaric Alps of the Balkans, farmers developed techniques to cultivate small polges, flat-bottomed depressions within karst terrain that periodically flooded. When dry, these basins offered fertile soil, though farmers had to time their planting carefully to avoid losing crops to unexpected inundations. This pattern of feast and frustration defined agricultural life, teaching resilience and adaptability long before modern irrigation systems. Karst also provided valuable resources. In many caves, deposits of saltpeter, an essential ingredient in gunpowder, were collected in later centuries, but even in antiquity, minerals from caves and quarries supported local economies. Stone itself, abundant in karst regions, was a crucial building material. Temples, walls, and dwellings were hewn from limestone blocks, linking daily life with the very rock beneath people's feet. Trade routes often followed the peculiarities of karst as well. Valleys between limestone ridges became natural corridors for movement, while springs provided essential water stops for caravans. Pilgrimage paths frequently led to sacred caves or springs, ensuring that karst features remained woven into the spiritual and economic fabric of societies. A landscape that at first glance might have seemed barren or treacherous became, with time, central to cultural identity. Even myths bear witness to how ancient peoples interpreted karst. In Greek stories, caves and chasms were entrances to Hades, realms of gods and monsters. In Norse legend, subterranean spaces were home to trolls and dwarves, beings associated with hidden riches and secret knowledge. In Central American myth, the underground was a place of trials and transformation. These tales reveal a consistent theme. What lies beneath is powerful, mysterious, and not to be taken lightly. Karst features, with their sudden openings and endless darkness, provided the perfect stage for such imaginations. What is remarkable is how consistent this pattern is across the globe. From the Maya cenote to the Greek spring, from the European cave painting to the Chinese Karst tower, human beings have always responded to these landscapes with a blend of awe, practicality and reverence. They drew water from them, sought shelter within them, buried their dead in their depths, and built stories around their strangeness. Ancient civilizations were shaped by many forces: climate, rivers, fertile soils, trade. But Karst played its own quiet role, guiding where people settled, how they farmed, what they worshipped, and how they imagined life beyond the visible world. In its silence and unpredictability, it demanded respect, and in return it offered water, shelter, and inspiration. These landscapes were not simply backgrounds to history, but active participants in it, helping to shape the course of civilizations that rose and fell on the surface above. For as long as people have gazed into the dark mouths of caves or peered into the still waters of a sinkhole, Karst landscapes have stirred the imagination. Their hidden depths, sudden openings, and echoing chambers have always seemed to invite stories. To early communities, these places were not merely natural oddities but thresholds between worlds. They were sacred spaces, homes of spirits, and entrances to realms beyond the reach of ordinary life. Myths and folklore blossomed in the shadows of limestone, wrapping mystery around geology. In ancient Greece, caves and chasms were often seen as doorways to Hades, the underworld where souls journeyed after death. The cave at Cape Matapan in the Peloponnese was one such site, believed to be an actual gateway to the realm of the dead. Pilgrims and storytellers alike imagined spirits passing through its darkness, and the geography itself lent weight to the tale. Where else could the world of shadows begin but in the earth's hidden hollows? Similarly, the oracle at Delphi, perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, drew its power from both its spring and nearby caves, where the presence of the divine seemed palpable. The Greeks understood that water bursting from stone and caves yawning into silence were no ordinary phenomena. They demanded mythic explanation. Further west, the Romans inherited and expanded these ideas. Springs were often dedicated to nymphs, goddesses, who embodied the purity and power of flowing water. The fontes of Karst springs were thought to be alive with spirits, their cold clarity proof of their divine guardianship. Shrines were built beside them, offerings left in gratitude for life-giving water. In Rome itself, the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer system, tapped into natural springs and underground channels, giving rise to legends that these waters were protected by deities who maintained the health of the city. Across the Atlantic, the Maya developed a cosmology in which cenotes, the great karst sinkholes of the Yucatan Peninsula, were portals to Xibalba, the underworld. These pools were central to survival, supplying fresh water in a landscape with no surface rivers, but they also became sites of ritual. Archaeologists have recovered jade, gold, pottery, and even human remains from cenotes, evidence of offerings to the gods. In Maya belief, the shimmering blue depths were not simply wells but cosmic thresholds, places where mortals could reach the divine and where the divine could reach back. In medieval Europe, caves retained their sense of the supernatural. Many were adapted into Christian shrines or hermitages, continuing a tradition of sacred use stretching back to prehistoric times. The cave of St. Michael at Monte Sant'Angelo in Italy became a famous pilgrimage site after the archangel was said to have appeared there in the 5th century. Similarly, the cave of St. Jerome near Bethlehem was revered as the place where the saint translated the Bible into Latin. In these instances, the dark, echoing spaces that once symbolized the underworld were reimagined as sanctuaries of divine presence. Folklore from northern Europe often placed mythical beings in subterranean spaces. Trolls in Scandinavian tales lurked in caves and rocky fissures, emerging only at night. Dwarves, associated with mining and hidden treasures, were said to live in underground halls carved from limestone and granite alike. These stories reflected both awe and unease, The underground was where riches could be found, but also where danger dwelled. A reminder that the earth below was as alive with mystery as the skies above. In the Balkans, where the very term karst originated, legends abound around springs and sinkholes. Some springs were believed to be bottomless, guarded by serpents or spirits. Villagers told stories of lakes that swallowed entire herds, or of caves where voices echoed back as if spoken by otherworldly beings. These tales often carried moral lessons: wander too close, show disrespect, or fail to offer proper tribute, and the earth itself might punish you. Karst features also played roles in ritual beyond myth. In Slovenia, for instance, sacred wells were sites of seasonal festivals. Offerings of bread, flowers, or coins were tossed into the waters to ensure fertility and good harvests. In some cases, the water from these wells was believed to carry healing powers, capable of curing illness or granting blessings. The blending of practical need with sacred reverence ensured that communities treated these fragile water sources with care. In China, the dramatic limestone towers of Guilin became part of a cultural landscape imbued with symbolism. Artists painted the mist-shrouded peaks as embodiments of harmony between heaven and earth. Poets compared their soaring forms to dragons or immortal mountains, linking geology with cosmology. While not explicitly religious in the way of cenotes or oracles, these towers were still sacred in their own right, shaping artistic and philosophical traditions for centuries. Even in modern times, echoes of these myths persist. Stories of bottomless caves, haunted sinkholes, and enchanted springs continue to circulate in rural communities. Tour guides often recount local legends to visitors, blending scientific explanations with whispers of the supernatural. In this way, folklore lives on, reminding us that the human imagination never completely severs its bond with the mysterious. What all of these traditions share is the sense that karst landscapes are thresholds, places where the ordinary world thins and another realm presses close. A spring bursting from solid rock seems miraculous. A cave plunging into darkness suggests infinite depth. A sinkhole swallowing rivers hints at hidden universes below. For ancient peoples without scientific explanations, the only logical conclusion was that such features were sacred. They were gifts from gods, doors to the underworld or dwellings of spirits. There is also something deeply human about treating these spaces with reverence. To depend on water from a spring is to recognize its life-giving power. To shelter in a cave is to experience its protection. To bury offerings in a cenote is to express gratitude and seek favor. These practices, rooted in survival, naturally evolved into ritual and myth. They turned geology into theology, hydrology into cosmology. Even today, standing at the mouth of a great cavern, or gazing into the blue depths of a cenote, it is easy to see why these places became sacred. The darkness is profound, the silence unsettling, the water otherworldly. Science may explain the chemistry and hydrology, but awe remains. In that sense, the myths and sacred traditions of karst are not relics of the past, but reflections of a feeling that still stirs within us. That some places are simply closer to mystery than others. The legends tied to karst remind us that landscapes are never just physical spaces. They're also cultural and spiritual terrains, woven with meaning by those who live among them. Caves, springs, and sinkholes are not only geological phenomena, they're also vessels for stories that connect generations, shaping how people see their world and their place within it. To step into a karst landscape is to walk through a geography of myth as much as a geography of stone. Few landscapes have stirred the imagination quite like karst. Its caves, towers, and sudden voids are not only geological curiosities, but also enduring symbols in literature and art. When poets and painters sought to capture mystery, transcendence, or the sublime, they often turned to these strange formations of stone and shadow. Karst is more than a terrain. It is a canvas on which generations of writers and artists have projected awe, fear, reverence, and beauty. China offers some of the most celebrated artistic responses to Karst. The limestone towers of Guilin and the Li River Valley have appeared in poetry and painting for more than 1,000 years. Tang dynasty poets described the mist-shrouded peaks as though they were spirits rising from the earth, their jagged silhouettes embodying the harmony of heaven and earth. Ink paintings often portrayed the region's iconic spires, dotted with fishermen in bamboo boats or solitary scholars contemplating the view. These landscapes were not painted for accuracy alone, but to evoke philosophy, the way that nature's ruggedness mirrors the human quest for clarity and enlightenment. So deeply embedded are these Karst images in Chinese culture that the Guilin scenery still appears on modern banknotes, carrying with it the weight of artistic tradition. European art and literature reveal a different fascination, the allure of caves. From the Renaissance onward, caves became symbols of both wonder and dread. The playwrights of antiquity had already used them as settings for oracles, nymphs, and underworld journeys, but later authors infused them with allegory. Dante, in the early 14th century, descended into the dark caverns of the Inferno, each level more haunting than the last. His imagined underworld was inspired in part by real Italian grottos, where the weight of stone and the drip of water seemed to suggest eternal punishment and divine mystery alike. Romantic poets centuries later embraced caves and cliffs as symbols of the sublime, those moments when beauty and terror combine to overwhelm the senses. Lord Byron, who travelled widely in Europe, wrote vividly of alpine landscapes, including karst gorges and caverns. In Manfred, his brooding protagonist retreats into the high mountains and echoing caves of the Alps, seeking both solace and confrontation with supernatural forces. The imagery of karstic landscapes suited the romantic mood perfectly. Rugged, mysterious, and vast beyond human scale. Painters too were drawn to the drama of underground worlds. In the 17th and 18th centuries, European artists produced capricci, fantastical paintings that blended real ruins and imagined caverns. These canvases often featured crumbling arches opening onto vast grottos, lit by torches that revealed stalactites and craggy vaults. The interplay of light and darkness heightened the sense of mystery. Later, when caves such as Postojna in Slovenia or Mammoth Cave in Kentucky became tourist attractions, artists and early photographers documented their interiors, marvelling at formations that looked like chandeliers, curtains, or organ pipes sculpted from stone. These images circulated widely, fueling both scientific interest and artistic inspiration. The 19th century brought yet another shift, as explorers and naturalists began publishing detailed accounts of karst landscapes. Illustrated travelogues combined science with artistry, blending precise drawings of stalactites with romantic depictions of cavernous chambers lit by flickering lanterns. These works straddled the line between geology and imagination, making the underground accessible to audiences who might never see it firsthand. Folklore and oral traditions also left their mark on the arts. In Scandinavia, stories of trolls lurking in caves inspired illustrators who filled children's books with shadowy limestone caverns populated by hulking figures. In Central Europe, tales of dragons sleeping beneath karst mountains appeared in both woodcuts and stained glass. Such images shaped how entire generations viewed caves, not only as geological features, but as theatres of the fantastic. In Latin America, the cenotes of the Yucatan entered not only myth, but also art. Modern Mexican painters, influenced by Maya traditions, have depicted these pools as cosmic portals, circles of turquoise set against lush jungles, symbols of both life and sacrifice. The cenote, with its still water and perfect symmetry, lends itself to visual symbolism, embodying the duality of sustenance and danger. Writers of the modern era have continued to draw on karst imagery. In fantasy novels, underground realms are often central settings, drawing on the archetype of the mysterious cave system. From Tolkien's Mines of Moria to modern tales of labyrinths and hidden rivers, the influence of real Karst topography is unmistakable. Science fiction has even borrowed the imagery of stalactites and echoing caverns to imagine alien worlds. The sense of vastness, strangeness, and otherworldliness makes Karst the perfect template for landscapes that stretch beyond ordinary experience. Photography in the 20th century introduced an entirely new way of engaging with these places. With long exposures and artificial lighting, photographers captured the interior of caves in unprecedented detail. The glitter of calcite formations, the sheen of underground lakes, and the sheer scale of caverns could now be preserved and shared widely. Images of Slovenia's Škocjan caves or France's Gouffre de Padirac became iconic, inspiring new generations of travellers, poets, and artists alike. Even cinema has embraced Karst. Films often use caves as symbols of hidden danger or discovery. From adventure tales where heroes stumble into underground rivers, to horror films where darkness conceals ancient terrors, caves provide the perfect atmosphere. Tower Karst landscapes too appear in countless productions, their jagged silhouettes offering backdrops that seem unreal even when entirely natural. One glance at the limestone towers of Halong Bay, and it becomes clear why filmmakers choose them. They appear like a fantasy painting already rendered by geology. Modern art installations sometimes take place within caves themselves, using the natural acoustics and haunting beauty of Karst chambers as both gallery and stage. Musicians perform in underground amphitheatres, where sound reverberates in ways no concert hall can match. Visual artists project light onto stalactites and stone walls, creating ephemeral spectacles that highlight the artistry of nature while adding a human touch. These events blur the line between natural wonder and cultural creation, showing that the relationship between Karst and art is still evolving. What unites all of these expressions, from ancient poetry to contemporary performance, is the recognition that Karst landscapes evoke emotions beyond the ordinary. They are places where mystery dwells, where beauty feels tinged with danger, and where silence is as powerful as sound. For artists and writers, this makes them irresistible. They are metaphors waiting to be painted, verses waiting to be spoken, and stages waiting to be lit. In literature and art, Karst is never just rock. It is memory and imagination, myth and metaphor. It is the dragon's lair, the poet's solitude, the painter's dramatic composition, and the photographer's challenge of capturing light in darkness. The landscapes carved by water and time have carved their way into culture as well, leaving impressions as lasting as the stone towers and echoing caverns themselves. To look at a painting of Gillen, or to read a poem about a cave, is to glimpse the way humanity has always responded to Karst, with wonder, creativity, and the sense that these forms of stone and silence are part of something greater than us all. Living in Karst country has never been simple. The landscapes are dramatic and beautiful, but they also present constant obstacles. Thin soils, unpredictable water supplies, and sudden sinkholes make farming uncertain. Rivers vanish when they are needed most, reappearing far away in places that may be of little use to the people who depend on them. Yet human beings, persistent and inventive, have found ways to adapt. Across continents, communities living on limestone plateaus and in rocky valleys developed strategies that turned challenges into traditions, weaving survival into culture. Agriculture was always the greatest struggle in these lands. The porous nature of limestone meant that rainfall seeped away quickly, leaving little moisture for crops. In many regions, fertile ground collected only in depressions where sediments had gathered over centuries. These basins, known as poljes in the Balkans, became lifelines. Farmers planted wheat, maize, or vegetables in the dark soils, relying on seasonal rhythms to guide them. During rainy months, poljes often flooded, becoming shallow lakes that drowned young plants. When the water retreated, farmers rushed to sow again, taking advantage of the short window before the next inundation. The cycle was frustrating but dependable in its own way, teaching generations to watch the skies and read the land closely. Terracing was another widespread adaptation. By carving steps into slopes of limestone hills, communities created small pockets of arable land where water and soil could be retained. In Mediterranean Karst, olive trees, grapevines, and hardy cereals flourished on these terraces, forming the backbone of diets and economies. Dry stone walls, carefully stacked without mortar, prevented erosion and captured what little soil there was. These walls, still standing in many places today, testify to the ingenuity of farmers who coaxed life out of a landscape that seemed determined to resist cultivation. Livestock offered a different strategy for survival. Where crops were unreliable, herding became a way of life. Goats, sheep, and hardy cattle could graze on sparse vegetation and survive in rugged terrain. Shepherds led flocks across rocky slopes following seasonal pastures. In the Balkans, transhumance, the seasonal movement of livestock between lowlands in winter and uplands in summer, became a well-established tradition. Similar practices evolved in karst regions of Spain, Greece, and the Middle East. The rhythm of herding tied communities to the land in ways both practical and cultural, shaping music, folklore, and social structures around the movements of animals. Fishing also played a surprising role in certain karst landscapes. Underground rivers and springs provided habitats for fish, eels, and crustaceans that could supplement diets. In some Mediterranean regions, freshwater springs emerging along coasts became productive fishing grounds. Elsewhere, sinkholes that filled with water supported small-scale fisheries. These aquatic resources were unpredictable, but they added variety to diets and anchored settlements to specific places where water was reliable. Caves themselves provided more than mystery, they were practical shelters. In times of conflict, communities retreated into the protection of underground chambers. During harsh winters, caves offered warmth, their stable temperatures shielding inhabitants from freezing winds. In hot climates, they served as cool refuges. Some communities went further, constructing permanent dwellings within rock. Cappadocia in Turkey, though not strictly limestone, offers a famous example of troglodyte architecture, where people carved entire cities into cliffs. In karst regions, smaller-scale cave dwellings were common, especially for shepherds seeking seasonal shelter. These spaces connected people to the underground world not only spiritually but practically, embedding survival into stone. Water management was perhaps the most constant concern. Communities developed ingenious ways to capture and store water before it vanished into fissures. Cisterns were carved into rock, lined with plaster, and filled during rainy periods. Wells were sunk into aquifers, sometimes reaching astonishing depths. In the Mediterranean, stone channels guided rainwater from rooftops into underground tanks. Every drop was precious, and the systems developed to conserve it became as much a part of cultural identity as local foods or festivals. Even today, in many karst villages, old cisterns remain central to communal life. Adaptation also meant knowing how to live with hazards. People in sinkhole-prone regions learned to recognize warning signs in the land, avoiding construction in areas where the ground felt hollow or where depressions had formed in the past. Oral traditions often carried practical wisdom, warning children not to play too close to certain spots or advising farmers against building near suspicious hollows. Myths may have explained these features as the work of gods or spirits, but underneath the stories lay practical lessons in survival. Economies in karst regions often leaned heavily on trade. Thin soils and erratic harvests meant that surpluses were rare. Instead, people turned to goods that could be produced in rocky environments: olive oil, wine, wool, and cheese. These products were durable and valuable, easily transported along trade routes that wound through valleys and mountain passes. In this way, karst landscapes, though harsh, became hubs of cultural exchange. What they lacked in abundant grain, they made up for in products that travelled far beyond their borders. Community life itself was shaped by the demands of karst. In areas with limited arable land, cooperation was essential. Families shared water sources, maintained terraces together, and coordinated grazing patterns to avoid overuse of fragile slopes. Festivals often revolved around the cycles of water and agriculture. The return of rains, the draining of flooded polges, or the shearing of sheep. These traditions reinforced bonds between people, ensuring survival through collective effort. Karst regions also fostered resilience in unexpected ways. Scarcity forced people to innovate, to diversify, and to develop a deep knowledge of their environment. Where outsiders might see barren stone, locals recognized medicinal plants, hidden springs, and seasonal cues. The skills required to survive in Karst, patience, observation, and adaptability, became cultural virtues. Communities learned to live lightly, taking advantage of opportunities without overexploiting fragile resources. Over centuries, these adaptations created distinctive cultural landscapes. Dry stone walls crisscross Mediterranean hillsides. Shepherd songs echo in limestone valleys. Villages cluster around springs and polges, their architecture shaped by the availability of stone and water. These are not random patterns, but living maps of human resilience, etched into the land as surely as caves are etched into limestone. Traditional life in Karst was never easy, but it was always inventive. People farmed where they could, herded where they must, fished where water allowed, and built communities around the unpredictable generosity of springs and soils. The result was a way of life both fragile and enduring, precarious yet deeply rooted in the rhythms of rock and water. Even as modern infrastructure and technology have eased some of these challenges, the old patterns remain visible, reminders of centuries spent adapting to landscapes that demand respect. The story of survival in Karst is not just one of hardship, it is also one of ingenuity and creativity. It shows how humans, faced with uncertainty, do not simply endure, but transform their surroundings into places of meaning, productivity, and culture. The rocky terrain may have tested them, but it also shaped identities, communities, and traditions that continue to echo across Karst landscapes today. Karst landscapes may appear austere, even stingy at first glance, with their thin soils, vanishing rivers, and rocky terrain. Yet beneath the surface and within the very stone lies a wealth of resources that humans have long been eager to exploit. From quarrying limestone for construction to harvesting minerals and guano from caves, people have found ways to turn Karst into an economic engine. The relationship has always been double-edged. Karst gives generously, but it does not forgive overuse. Limestone itself has been one of the most valuable resources. Formed from ancient seas, packed with the compressed skeletons and shells of long-dead marine life, it is abundant in karst regions and relatively easy to quarry. For millennia, limestone blocks have been cut and shaped into buildings, temples, and city walls. The Great Pyramid of Giza, although not in a classic karst landscape, was built largely of limestone, demonstrating the stone's central role in monumental architecture. In Europe, medieval cathedrals drew heavily on local limestone quarries, their soaring walls and delicate carvings testament to both the stone's strength and its workable softness. Even today, limestone remains a staple of construction, used in cement, mortar, and aggregates. Beyond its structural uses, limestone has also been exploited for its chemical properties. When heated in kilns, it produces quicklime, a substance essential for everything from mortar making to tanning leather and refining sugar. Entire industries grew around lime production, with kilns dotting the edges of karst regions. Farmers spread lime on their fields to reduce soil acidity, while builders mixed it into plasters and mortars. The stone that dissolved quietly underground also built civilizations above ground, serving as both foundation and binder. Caves themselves have yielded resources that shaped history in unexpected ways. In many karst caverns, accumulations of bat guano became highly prized. Though not glamorous, guano is rich in nitrates, making it an excellent fertilizer and, more significantly, a critical ingredient in the production of gunpowder. During the 18th and 19th centuries, guano from caves in the Americas and Asia was harvested on a large scale, feeding both agriculture and warfare. Entire economies sprang up around this unlikely commodity, showing that even the droppings of bats could become geopolitically significant. Saltpeter, another cave-derived resource, was especially important. It formed naturally on cave walls and floors, where nitrates crystallized out of decomposing organic matter. During times of conflict, caves in North America and Europe were scoured for saltpeter deposits to supply gunpowder factories. The War of 1812, for instance, saw American caves mined intensely to fuel the nation's military efforts. In this way, subterranean Karst became a hidden arsenal, its quiet chambers feeding the thunder of cannons. Other minerals, though less dramatic, have also been extracted from karst regions. Bauxite, the ore of aluminum, is often found in karstic depressions, where it accumulates through weathering. Large deposits in places like Jamaica and Hungary transformed local economies in the 20th century, as aluminum became indispensable for modern industry. Lead, zinc and iron ores sometimes occur in karst settings as well, formed by mineral-rich waters circulating through limestone. These resources further entwined karst with human enterprise, turning rocky hills into sources of global materials. Water itself is one of karst's most heavily exploited resources. Karst aquifers provide drinking water to nearly 1/4 of the world's population. Cities from Rome to Vienna to Mexico City have drawn on springs and wells fed by karst. The reliability and purity of these waters made them invaluable, though their vulnerability to pollution and overuse often brought problems. Dams and reservoirs, difficult to manage in porous terrain, have nevertheless been attempted, sometimes with success, sometimes with costly leaks. The delicate balance of karst hydrology has always made water extraction a gamble, one that societies have been willing to take because the rewards were so vital. Stone forests, cliffs and towers also provided raw material for quarrying. Blocks of limestone were cut from the dramatic outcrops of southern China and Southeast Asia to build towns and monuments. In Europe, vast quarries scarred the sides of karst hills to provide stone for cities. The very formations that drew poets and painters also fed masons and builders. This duality is striking. The same tower admired as a natural wonder might be slowly dismantled for building stone. The exploitation of karst has not always been sustainable. Overquarrying has left some landscapes scarred, their dramatic features reduced to rubble. Guano extraction, carried out recklessly, destroyed delicate cave ecosystems that had taken millennia to form. Mining bauxite or other ores often left behind open pits and polluted waterways, damaging both the visible and hidden environments. Karst is resilient in some ways, but in others it is extremely fragile, and human activities have often pushed it to its limits. Tourism itself can be considered a form of resource use. Caves like Slovenia's Postojna or Kentucky's Mammoth Cave have been commercial attractions for centuries, drawing visitors with promises of underground wonder. Pathways, lighting systems, and infrastructure have been built to accommodate millions of visitors. This has brought economic benefits, but also strain, as increased carbon dioxide from visitors' breath and artificial lights encourage the growth of algae that damage formations. The beauty of karst, once a freely given gift, has become a commodity, sold in tickets and souvenirs, with all the complications that come from turning nature into a marketplace. In many regions, however, people have also learned to balance exploitation with stewardship. Protected areas now conserve some of the most spectacular karst landscapes, ensuring that quarrying and mining do not erase their unique character. Sustainable tourism initiatives attempt to limit the impact of visitors, guiding them through only certain chambers and carefully monitoring conditions. Water protection zones safeguard aquifers, recognizing that these underground systems are too valuable to squander. The story of karst resources is, in the end, a story of human ingenuity mixed with human appetite. People discovered ways to use every part of these landscapes, from the stone itself to the minerals it contained and even the droppings of creatures that lived within. These resources built cities, fueled armies, and fed fields, showing that Karst was never just a backdrop but an active participant in human history. Yet this exploitation has always carried risks, for Karst is not infinite. Its aquifers can be drained, its caves stripped bare, its cliffs quarried into absence. What remains clear is that Karst has shaped economies as much as it has shaped valleys and hills. The limestone under our feet is not only a geological wonder, but a foundation of human civilization. The hidden caverns have not only inspired myths, but supplied materials that changed the course of history. To walk through a Karst region is to move through a landscape that has been both treasured and plundered, revered for its beauty and consumed for its wealth. And in that tension lies the ongoing challenge: how to draw from Karst without destroying the very wonder that makes it so extraordinary. Karst landscapes may dazzle with their beauty, but they are also landscapes of uncertainty. Beneath their elegance lies instability, for the very forces that carve caves and sculpt towers also create hazards. Living in or near Karst has always been a gamble. The same hidden rivers that supply water can flood without warning, the same underground chambers that inspire awe can collapse, and the same thin soils that support hardy crops can vanish into hollows overnight. It is a world where danger is often invisible until the moment it makes itself known. The most familiar hazard in Karst regions is the sinkhole. These sudden collapses occur when the roof of an underground cavity can no longer support the weight above. Sometimes the warning signs are subtle: cracks forming in the ground, a door that refuses to close, or a patch of land that sinks ever so slightly. At other times, there is no warning at all. A gaping hole simply opens, swallowing roads, cars, and, in rare but tragic cases, entire houses. Florida, underlain by thick limestone, has become almost synonymous with sinkholes, with hundreds forming every year. China's enormous dolines, by contrast, are on another scale entirely, measuring hundreds of meters deep and across. While spectacular, they remind us that the earth beneath our feet in Karst country is not always as solid as it seems. Flooding is another persistent threat. Karst hydrology does not follow the predictable patterns of surface rivers. Instead, water disappears into fissures, races through underground channels, and resurfaces at springs. During heavy rains, those underground pathways can quickly become overwhelmed, forcing water to rise rapidly and unpredictably. Polgers, the flat-bottomed depressions common in the Balkans, often transform into seasonal lakes after storms, drowning fields and settlements. For farmers, these floods are both expected and exasperating, part of the annual rhythm yet always capable of causing ruin. Even modern infrastructure struggles to cope with such sudden inundations, for water in Karst does not obey the neat logic of drainage systems. Subsidence, slower than a sinkhole but just as damaging, is another hazard. Instead of a sudden collapse, the ground gradually sags as underground cavities expand. Buildings tilt, roads crack, and pipelines rupture. Unlike dramatic sinkholes that demand immediate attention, subsidence often creeps along quietly, costing communities enormous sums in repairs over decades. Urban expansion into Karst areas has made this problem increasingly common. Where once only shepherds and farmers contended with unpredictable ground, now entire suburbs and industrial zones are built on limestone foundations that cannot always be trusted. Earthquakes interact with Karst in particularly troublesome ways. Although Karst itself does not cause seismic activity, its hollow structures can magnify the effects. Underground chambers may collapse under the shock, triggering secondary sinkholes. Springs may shift their course, leaving settlements suddenly without water. In some cases, earthquakes open new fissures that reroute rivers altogether. For people living in Karst terrain, seismic events bring a double threat: the shaking of the earth itself and the collapse of the fragile underground architecture. Storms and climate events also interact with karst in unique ways. Because surface water drains so quickly into fissures, karst regions often experience flash flooding during intense rain. Water that should spread out across a floodplain instead plunges into underground channels, only to surge up at springs miles away. This can create floods in areas seemingly far removed from rainfall. Conversely, droughts can hit karst regions particularly hard. With little surface water storage, communities depend on springs that may dry up when groundwater levels fall. The unpredictability of water flow means that storms can bring both too much water and too little, sometimes within the same year. Pollution presents a more insidious hazard. While not dramatic in the way of collapsing ground or sudden floods, contamination of karst aquifers can have devastating effects. Because water travels quickly through open channels, pollutants spread rapidly and with little natural filtration. A single spill of chemicals or sewage can taint springs that supply thousands of people. Unlike other hazards, which may be localized, pollution in karst often travels invisibly and far, making it difficult to track and control. For communities relying on these aquifers, vigilance is a constant necessity. Caves themselves, so often sources of wonder, also carry risks. Their stable temperatures and silence can lull explorers into complacency, but underground environments are unpredictable. Sudden floods can trap people in passageways, while toxic gases such as carbon dioxide can accumulate in poorly ventilated chambers. Loose rocks and unstable ceilings pose constant dangers. Historically, shepherds and farmers who used caves as shelters knew to tread carefully. Today, recreational cavers and tourists sometimes underestimate the risks, leading to accidents that highlight how unforgiving these environments can be. Even the dramatic cliffs and towers of karst come with dangers. Rockfalls are common, as water and weather slowly weaken the stone. A pinnacle that has stood for centuries can collapse suddenly after heavy rains or frost. For communities living in the shadows of such formations, the possibility of falling rock is a quiet but ever-present concern. In coastal karst, the combination of limestone cliffs and pounding waves produces landslides that reshape shorelines dramatically. Beauty and danger are often inseparable in these landscapes. In tropical karst regions, hazards take on yet another form. The razor-sharp pinnacles of Madagascar's Chingi de Bemaraha can be nearly impassable, slicing through footwear and skin with ease. Navigating such terrain requires caution and respect, for the landscape itself is as hazardous as any storm. In Southeast Asia, heavy monsoons combine with karst hydrology to create sudden floods and landslides, disrupting communities that have learned to live with cycles of destruction and renewal. Despite these risks, people continue to inhabit karst regions, drawn by their water, their fertile pockets of soil, and their unique character. Hazards are accepted as part of life, just as coastal dwellers accept storms or river communities endure floods. Over generations, knowledge accumulates: where to build, which areas to avoid, how to recognize warning signs. Folklore often encodes these lessons, with stories warning against disrespecting certain springs or wandering near dangerous hollows. What might sound like superstition is often practical wisdom wrapped in narrative form. Modern science has improved our understanding of these hazards, allowing for better prediction and mitigation. Remote sensing can identify underground voids before construction begins. Dye tracing reveals the hidden paths of water, and monitoring systems track groundwater levels to forecast floods. Yet even with technology, the essential unpredictability of karst remains. No model can capture every twist of an underground river or every weakness in a cavern roof. Living with karst hazards is still in many ways a matter of adapting rather than conquering. What makes these dangers especially striking is their quiet origin. There is no dramatic volcanic eruption, no roaring glacier, no towering tsunami. Instead, the hazards of karst emerge from the same processes that create its beauty. Water dissolving stone, voids expanding in silence, springs bursting forth unexpectedly. The very features that inspire awe also create vulnerability. To live in Karst country is to accept this paradox, that wonder and risk are carved from the same rock. Ultimately, Karst hazards remind us of the delicate balance between humans and the landscapes they inhabit. They teach humility, for even the ground beneath us is not always secure. They encourage resilience, as communities learn to adapt and endure. And they challenge us to remember that nature's artistry often comes with a hidden price. In the silence of limestone chambers and the sudden collapse of sinkholes lies a lesson. Beauty and danger are inseparable companions in the strange, unpredictable world of Karst. Karst landscapes have always been dynamic, shaped by the slow persistence of water-dissolving stone. Yet in the modern age, change is arriving faster and with far greater consequences than ever before. Human activity now competes with natural processes, often accelerating or amplifying transformations that once unfolded over millennia. Climate change, tourism and pollution are pressing on these delicate systems, testing their resilience and forcing us to reconsider how we relate to them. One of the most immediate pressures is climate change. Karst aquifers, which supply nearly 1/4 of the world's population with drinking water, are highly sensitive to shifts in rainfall. In some regions, prolonged droughts are causing springs to dry up earlier in the year, disrupting agriculture and forcing communities to rely on deeper wells or imported water. In others, heavier storms overwhelm underground drainage systems, leading to floods that are more severe and less predictable than in the past. Because karst water moves quickly through open channels, there is little buffer against extremes. A dry season can empty reservoirs with startling speed, while a storm can flood fields in hours. These fluctuations, once seasonal rhythms, are becoming increasingly erratic. Rising temperatures add another layer of stress. In alpine karst regions, glaciers that once fed limestone aquifers are retreating, reducing long-term supplies of meltwater. Ice caves that preserved records of past climates for centuries are melting away, erasing archives that scientists rely on to understand the history of Earth's atmosphere. In tropical karst, hotter conditions combined with shifting rainfall are altering entire ecosystems. Plants and animals adapted to thin soils and specific hydrological patterns now face environments that may no longer support them. The very resilience that once defined karst biodiversity is being tested in ways evolution never anticipated. Tourism brings its own set of challenges. Caves that were once silent sanctuaries now echo with the footsteps and voices of millions of visitors each year. Famous sites like Slovenia's Postojna Cave or Kentucky's Mammoth Cave attract vast crowds, and while this brings economic benefits, it also alters the underground environment. Artificial lighting encourages the growth of algae on delicate formations, a phenomenon sometimes called lamp and flora. The carbon dioxide exhaled by visitors subtly changes the cave atmosphere, while the heat from bodies and lights can disturb stable temperatures. Even careful management cannot eliminate the impact entirely. The very act of opening these spaces to the public alters their natural balance. Above ground, the towers and cliffs of Karst have become icons of scenic tourism. The limestone pinnacles of Gilin, the misty bays of Harlong, and the stone forests of Madagascar are photographed endlessly, their beauty broadcast across the globe. This fame, however, comes at a cost. Construction of hotels, roads and viewing platforms often scars the very landscapes tourists come to admire. Increased foot traffic erodes trails, and careless visitors may leave graffiti or litter on formations that took millennia to form. The paradox is striking. The more people celebrate the uniqueness of karst, the more fragile it becomes under their gaze. Pollution represents a quieter but perhaps more insidious threat. Because water travels rapidly through karst aquifers, contaminants spread quickly and with little filtration. Agricultural fertilizers, pesticides, and industrial chemicals seep into fissures, reappearing miles away at springs that supply entire towns. Unlike in sandy aquifers, where soil layers act as natural filters, karst offers little protection. Once polluted, an aquifer can remain compromised for years or even decades. In some cases, toxins accumulate in underground lakes or streams, threatening not only human health, but also the unique cave ecosystems that rely on pristine conditions. Urbanization compounds these problems. Expanding cities often sprawl across karst terrain, paving over natural recharge zones and altering drainage. Roads, housing developments, and factories disrupt the delicate hydrology, sometimes redirecting underground flows in unpredictable ways. Stormwater runoff carries oil, metals, and waste into fissures, while landfills built on limestone can leach contaminants directly into aquifers. The invisible nature of karst makes it easy to forget that the ground beneath is riddled with channels and voids. A careless decision on the surface may echo through entire underground systems. Mining and quarrying continue to place pressure on karst as well. Limestone remains a crucial raw material for cement, agriculture, and construction. The extraction process leaves scars that are often irreversible, removing cliffs and plateaus entirely. In some places, quarrying has destroyed unique karst features before they could be studied or protected. Bauxite mining, particularly in tropical karst, has transformed landscapes, leaving behind pits and polluted waters. While these industries are vital to modern economies, they often exact heavy costs on ecosystems and communities. Yet it is not all a story of decline. Awareness of karst's fragility has grown in recent decades, leading to stronger protections. UNESCO World Heritage designations now safeguard some of the most iconic karst regions, from China's South China Karst to the Skosian caves in Slovenia. These protections limit quarrying, regulate tourism, and support conservation. In places like Austria, strict water protection zones around karst springs ensure that aquifers remain clean for generations to come. Scientific monitoring and community engagement have made it possible to balance use with preservation, even if the balance remains delicate. There are also inspiring examples of sustainable tourism. Some caves limit visitor numbers or restrict access to sensitive chambers. Low-impact lighting reduces algae growth, while guided tours educate visitors about the importance of conservation. Above ground, ecotourism initiatives encourage appreciation of karst landscapes without the heavy infrastructure that damages them. By framing these places not just as attractions but as living systems, such efforts foster respect and stewardship. Climate adaptation is also taking root. Farmers in karst regions are experimenting with drought-resistant crops, rainwater harvesting, and soil restoration to cope with shifting conditions. Scientists are mapping aquifers in unprecedented detail, using dyes, sensors, and models to understand water flows and vulnerabilities. This knowledge helps communities prepare for floods and manage supplies more effectively. Although challenges remain daunting, the very unpredictability of karst has encouraged innovation. Still, the overarching theme is that karst is under strain. These landscapes took millions of years to form, yet they can be damaged in a matter of decades. The patience of dripping water cannot compete with the speed of bulldozers, climate shifts, or unchecked pollution. Once lost, a cave formation or aquifer cannot simply be replaced. The fragility of karst is matched only by its importance. The modern pressures on karst invite reflection on our relationship with the natural world. They ask whether we can learn to value landscapes not just for what they provide, but for what they are. Irreplaceable records of Earth's history and habitats of rare beauty. The challenge is to ensure that the same forces of human curiosity and ambition that have brought us into karst's depths do not also become the forces that erase them. In this changing world, karst stands as both a gift and a warning. It offers water, wonder, and cultural heritage, but it also reveals how easily those gifts can be undone. The caves and cliffs remind us of time's patient artistry, and the threats they face remind us that artistry can be fragile. Whether these landscapes endure as sources of inspiration or decline into cautionary tales depends on how we choose to act in the decades to come. Across the Eastern Hemisphere, karst landscapes rise into forms so distinctive and iconic that they have come to symbolize entire nations and cultures. From misty rivers lined with limestone towers to bays filled with emerald waters and scattered islands, these landscapes are instantly recognizable even to those who have never set foot in them. They are more than geological curiosities. They're emblems of identity, sources of artistic inspiration, and magnets for travellers seeking beauty that borders on the surreal. Perhaps the most celebrated example is the Karst of Guilin and Yangshuo in southern China. Here the Li River winds gracefully through a valley flanked by steep limestone towers, their peaks softened by mist and their slopes blanketed with bamboo groves and rice paddies. These towers, known as fenglin, were formed over millions of years as water dissolved the surrounding limestone, leaving behind isolated spires. The result is a dreamlike panorama that has enchanted poets, painters and travellers for centuries. Tang dynasty poets wrote verses comparing the landscape to dragons and immortals, while painters rendered its forms in ink washes that emphasized not just its physical beauty but its spiritual resonance. Today, a journey down the Li River is a rite of passage for visitors to China, and the scene is so iconic that it appears on the country's 20-yuan banknote. Travel southeast from Guilin and the wonder continues in Vietnam's Ha Long Bay, one of the most famous karst seascapes in the world. Thousands of limestone islands and islets rise dramatically from the emerald waters of the Gulf of Tonkin, their cliffs draped in lush vegetation. Each island is different. Some are sharp and jagged, others rounded and gentle, some hollowed into caves with vast chambers filled with stalactites. Local legends tell of dragons that descended to protect the Vietnamese people, their tails carving the valleys and their bodies dropping jewels that became the islands. Whether viewed from a boat gliding among the pillars or from a high vantage point at dawn, the bay exudes an otherworldly calm, as though it were a landscape suspended between sea and sky. Ha Long Bay has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1994, recognised for both its natural beauty and its geological significance. Not far away in Laos lies another karst treasure, the Plain of Jars. Though not as visually dramatic as towering peaks or ocean bays, it is no less mysterious. Here, thousands of megalithic stone jars, some weighing several tons, are scattered across rolling karst plateaus. Their origins are still debated. Some suggest they were funerary urns for Iron Age peoples, while others propose they were used for food storage or brewing rice wine. Whatever their function, the jars give the landscape an enigmatic quality, blending human history with geological backdrop. The karst hills surrounding the plains provided stone for carving, while caves nearby reveal evidence of ancient burials. The Plain of Jars demonstrates how karst landscapes often intertwine with human culture in ways that defy easy explanation. Further south, the karst formations of Bangar Bay in Thailand provide another breathtaking example. Rising from turquoise waters, the limestone islands are capped with greenery and pierced with sea caves and lagoons. James Bond Island, formerly known as Khao Phing Khan, became internationally famous after appearing in the 1974 film The Man with the Golden Gun. Yet the bay is more than a movie backdrop. It is a living system where mangroves, coral reefs and marine life coexist with towering cliffs and hidden caves. Kayakers slip through narrow tunnels to discover secret lagoons, while fishermen continue traditions that date back centuries. The karst here is as much a home as it is a spectacle, a reminder that these dramatic forms are living landscapes, not merely postcards. In Cambodia, the karst hills of Kampot and Kep are dotted with caves that hold Buddhist shrines, turning natural voids into sacred spaces. Local legends and religious practices imbue these landscapes with spiritual meaning. Some caves are adorned with carvings of Hindu deities, remnants of the Khmer Empire's influence, while others host statues of the Buddha, surrounded by incense smoke and offerings. The blending of karst geology with cultural layers is a recurring theme across Asia, where caves and springs often become sanctuaries of devotion. Indonesia too boasts remarkable karst terrains, particularly in the Raja Ampat Islands of West Papua. There, Hundreds of limestone islets dot turquoise seas, forming a maze of lagoons, cliffs, and hidden coves. This seascape is not only visually stunning but also biologically rich, part of the Coral Triangle, the most diverse marine ecosystem on Earth. The combination of karst topography and coral reefs creates a double wonder, a land and sea mosaic that supports extraordinary biodiversity. For local communities, these islands provide fish, shelter, and cultural significance, while for travellers they represent one of the planet's last relatively untouched paradises. Farther north, Japan offers its own unique karst landscapes. Akiyoshi-dai in Yamaguchi Prefecture is the country's largest karst plateau, a rolling field dotted with limestone pinnacles that resemble scattered tombstones. Beneath lies Akiyoshido Cave, one of Japan's longest, with vast chambers and underground rivers. The plateau and cave together showcase the diversity of karst, from windswept grasslands above to dripping stone cathedrals below. Japanese culture has long found poetry in such contrasts, and Akiyoshi-dai has inspired both scientific study and artistic reflection. Another distinctive site is Jeju Island in South Korea, famous for its lava tubes but also home to striking limestone cliffs along its coasts. While volcanic rather than classic limestone karst dominates, the interaction between geology and culture mirrors patterns seen elsewhere. The island's caves have been used for shelter, storage, and ritual, demonstrating again how subterranean features become woven into human life. Across the Eastern Hemisphere, what unites these landscapes is their dual identity. They are both physical features sculpted by water-dissolving stone and cultural landmarks shaped by myth, art, and human use. The peaks of Guilin are not just limestone towers, they are brushstrokes in Chinese painting. The islands of Halong Bay are not just remnants of dissolution, they are dragons turned to stone. The caves of Cambodia are not just voids in rock, they are sanctuaries of belief. Each famous karst landscape also tells a story of time. The towers of Guilin took millions of years to form, yet they became emblems of Chinese art in just a few centuries. The islands of Halong Bay are the product of slow erosion, yet they are also the backdrop for legends born in a single telling. The Plain of Jars links natural stone with human creativity, a mystery that endures through millennia. Karst teaches us that landscapes can be both ancient and immediate, geological and cultural, silent and yet filled with voices. These Eastern examples remind us that karst is not merely a scientific category, it is also a source of wonder, inspiration, and identity. To glide through Halong Bay at dawn or stand among the peaks of Guilin is to feel the weight of deep time and the lightness of human imagination all at once. They are landscapes of stone and silence, but also of poetry and story, living testaments to the partnership between Earth's slow artistry and humanity's endless creativity. In the Western world, karst landscapes spread across continents, shaping valleys, mountains, and coastlines into scenes as dramatic as any in the East. From the rugged limestone highlands of the Balkans to the sprawling cave networks of North America, these landscapes reveal geology at its most spectacular. They have inspired explorers, challenged farmers, and drawn countless visitors into their depths. Though the forms are similar, sinkholes, towers, caves, and springs, each region has stamped its own character onto the stone. The very word karst originates in the Western Balkans from the German adaptation of Kras, a limestone plateau that stretches across parts of Slovenia and Italy. Here, the defining features of karst are written large across the land. The plateau is dotted with sinkholes, caves, and disappearing rivers, all of which have fascinated naturalists for centuries. The Shkotsian Caves, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, showcase the grandeur of the region, with an underground canyon carved by the Rika River plunging through colossal chambers. Standing inside, one feels dwarfed by scale, as if nature had hollowed out a cathedral and left the organ music to the roaring river. This landscape gave science not just a name, but also a textbook example of how water can transform stone into labyrinths of astonishing beauty. Further into the Balkans, the Dinaric Alps offer some of the most striking karst terrain in Europe. Towering limestone ridges rise above Polyes, those great flat depressions that fill with water in wet seasons and dry out to fertile farmland in summer. Villages have long clung to the edges of these basins, living in rhythm with the unpredictable floods. Caves here are not only natural wonders but also cultural landmarks. The Vjetrenica cave in Bosnia, one of the largest in the region, contains both archaeological remains and rare species found nowhere else on Earth, such as the olm, a pale salamander that has adapted to life entirely underground. In the Dinaric Karst, science, culture and survival are bound together in a single landscape. Westward, the Alps themselves hold extensive karst systems hidden beneath their snowy peaks. Beneath the dramatic ridgelines of Austria and Switzerland lie cave systems that stretch for hundreds of kilometres. The Dachstein region of Austria boasts ice caves where frozen formations glitter in torchlight, alongside mammoth caverns where underground rivers cut through stone. The Mammuthöhle, or Mammoth Cave of Dachstein, lives up to its name with vast halls that dwarf human visitors. High-altitude karst is particularly intriguing because snowmelt and glaciers feed water into these systems, creating both stability and vulnerability. As glaciers retreat under modern warming, the hydrology of alpine karst is shifting, threatening both ecosystems and water supplies. Yet the allure remains strong. Adventurers and scientists alike continue to explore these subterranean realms, mapping spaces that feel as alien as the surface of another planet. Across the Atlantic, North America offers karst landscapes of staggering scale. Kentucky's Mammoth Cave is the undisputed giant, the longest known cave system on the planet, with more than 600 kilometers of passageways mapped and still more awaiting discovery. Early Native Americans explored parts of this vast network thousands of years ago, leaving behind torches and artifacts. In the 19th century, the cave became a site of tourism and even scientific study, where the unique adaptations of cave life were first documented. Today, Mammoth Cave National Park attracts visitors from around the world who marvel at the twisting corridors, massive chambers and delicate formations that took millennia to form. It is both a geological treasure and a cultural landmark, embodying the American fascination with grandeur and scale. Florida, too, is defined by karst, though in a very different form. The state's porous limestone foundation is riddled with sinkholes and aquifers, shaping not only the natural landscape but also daily life. The Floridan Aquifer is one of the largest in the world, supplying water to millions across several states. At the same time, the ever-present risk of sinkholes reminds residents that the ground beneath is not as solid as it seems. Entire lakes have formed overnight when the earth collapsed, swallowing water and land in dramatic fashion. For Floridians, karst is both provider and threat, a reminder of the uneasy balance between reliance and risk. In the American Southwest, karst takes on yet another character. Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico reveal chambers so large they could house entire city blocks, adorned with formations that resemble curtains, chandeliers, and frozen waterfalls. The Big Room, the cavern's centerpiece, is one of the largest underground chambers in the world, inspiring awe with its scale and intricacy. Long before it became a national park, these caves were known to indigenous peoples who regarded them with reverence. Today, they are not only destinations for tourists, but also homes for vast colonies of bats, whose nightly flights create natural spectacles as dramatic as the caves themselves. Europe's western karst includes equally famous sites. In France, the Causses and Cévennes are limestone plateaus cut by deep gorges, their cliffs and caves central to both natural beauty and human history. The Gouffre de Padirac, a dramatic sinkhole that leads into a navigable underground river, has drawn visitors since the 19th century. Descending into its depths, one encounters a world of stalactites, underground lakes, and echoing passages, all shaped by the patient persistence of water. The French landscape demonstrates the interplay of surface and subsurface, where green valleys and pastoral life coexist with hidden caverns of grandeur. Further north, Ireland's Burren presents a different face of Karst. Here, the surface itself is the spectacle, a grey pavement of exposed limestone slabs, cracked into geometric patterns by weathering. Between the fissures grow rare plants, creating a patchwork of life in what at first glance seems barren. The Burren has long fascinated naturalists and poets alike, its stark beauty inspiring comparisons to lunar landscapes. Beneath the rocky pavement lie caves, underground rivers, and hidden chambers, but even the surface alone captures the imagination with its austere elegance. In Spain, the Picos de Europa and Sierra de Grazalema hold dramatic karst formations that shape local traditions. Springs provide water to villages perched on rocky slopes, while caves house archaeological remains that trace human history back tens of thousands of years. The Cueva de Tito Bustillo in Asturias contains Paleolithic art, where prehistoric people painted animals deep underground. As in France, the caves are both natural wonders and cultural archives, holding evidence of early creativity in spaces carved by natural forces. What unites these Western examples is their diversity. From the vastness of Mammoth Cave to the delicate surface patterns of the Burren, from the flooded polders of the Balkans to the frozen caverns of the Alps, karst manifests in forms as varied as the cultures that live among them. Each landscape tells a story of time, water, and stone, but also of human ingenuity and imagination. They are places of awe and danger, of inspiration and survival, of resources and risks. Karst in the West may not always appear as exotic as the tower landscapes of Asia, yet it holds its own grandeur. It is found in the rolling limestone hills of England, the cliffs of the Adriatic, the plains of Hungary, and the plateaus of Mexico. It has been home to early humans, battlegrounds for armies, sanctuaries for monks, and laboratories for scientists. The variety is as endless as the channels beneath the surface. These landscapes remind us that karst is not confined to one culture or one continent. It is a global phenomenon, linking the Alps with Appalachia, the Balkans with the Burren. Each famous site is a chapter in a much larger story, the story of how water, patient and persistent, can carve worlds both beautiful and treacherous, and how humans, equally patient and persistent, have learned to live among them. Not all karst landscapes announce themselves with soaring towers or dramatic sinkholes. Some lie hidden in remote corners of the world, cloaked by ice, submerged beneath the sea, or disguised in settings where few expect to find them. These remote or unusual forms of karst remind us that the chemistry of water and limestone is not limited by climate or location. Where soluble rock meets flowing water, strange and beautiful features can arise even in the most unlikely places. Consider the icy wilderness of the Arctic. At first glance, one might not imagine karst thriving in such frozen realms. Yet polar karst exists, shaped not only by water, but by ice and snow. In Greenland and parts of Arctic Canada, limestone outcrops are riddled with caves and sinkholes, many filled with ice that has remained stable for centuries. Meltwater from glaciers carves channels through the bedrock, sometimes vanishing into moulins, deep shafts that funnel water straight down into the depths of the ice and rock beneath. These features create landscapes where glaciology and karst meet, a hybrid environment of stone, ice, and water in constant negotiation. The challenges of exploring such places are immense, but they reveal how karst processes continue even in regions dominated by frozen extremes. Antarctica, too, holds surprises. Beneath its vast ice sheets, limestone formations exist, remnants of ancient seas that once covered the continent. Though hidden under kilometres of ice, scientists suspect that karst processes may still be at work as meltwater percolates down and interacts with the buried bedrock. These unseen landscapes are some of the least accessible on Earth, yet they hint at the universality of karst. Even in the coldest, most remote places, the quiet chemistry of water and carbonate stone persists. Shift from polar extremes to tropical seas, and another hidden variant emerges: underwater karst. Beneath the world's oceans lie countless caves, channels, and sinkholes that began life on dry land before sea levels rose. During ice ages, when sea levels were far lower, rainwater carved caves into exposed limestone. When the seas returned, these caves flooded, becoming submerged labyrinths of astonishing beauty. The Bahamas are famous for blue holes, deep circular sinkholes filled with seawater that plunge into the earth like vertical tunnels. Some extend for hundreds of meters, connecting to vast underwater cave networks. Divers exploring these blue holes encounter surreal worlds of still water, unusual chemistry, and unique creatures. Stalactites and stalagmites, now submerged, reveal that these caves once echoed with dripping water long before the oceans claimed them. Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula also boasts extraordinary underwater karst. Its cenotes, already striking at the surface, connect to an immense network of submerged caves stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Systems like Sac-Acton and Oxbel Ha rank among the longest underwater cave networks ever discovered. Exploring them is both thrilling and perilous, as divers thread their way through passageways adorned with formations that predate the flooding. These underwater realms preserve evidence of prehistoric animals, ancient climate shifts, and even human remains, making them both scientific treasure troves and places of wonder. Karst is not confined to stone and seawater. In parts of the world, gypsum and salt, rocks that dissolve even faster than limestone, create their own variants of karst landscapes. These forms are often overlooked, hidden in arid regions or beneath layers of more familiar geology. In Spain's Sorbas Basin, gypsum karst has produced a maze of caves lined with glittering crystals. In Iran, salt karst creates dramatic sinkholes and caves where the bedrock itself flows and reshapes over short timescales. These hidden forms of karst remind us that the phenomenon is broader than limestone alone, encompassing any rock that yields to the patient work of water. Even deserts can harbour unexpected karst features. In the Sahara, limestone plateaus contain caves and sinkholes carved during wetter climatic periods long ago. Today, many lie dormant, their entrances buried by sand or hidden in barren landscapes. Yet they hold clues to ancient water systems that once supported lakes, rivers, and human communities. These fossil karst systems act as time capsules, preserving evidence of past climates in places where water now seems unimaginable. In Australia, remote karst landscapes add another twist. The Nullarbor Plain, one of the largest limestone platforms on Earth, is so flat and dry that its caves often remain hidden until one stumbles upon them. Beneath the plain, however, lie some of the world's most extensive cave systems, many still being explored. Some contain vast underground lakes with water so clear that divers appear to float in air. The isolation of the Nullarbor has protected these systems from heavy exploitation, leaving them pristine examples of how karst can flourish even in environments that appear outwardly barren. Hidden karst also occurs beneath forests and grasslands, where surface signs may be subtle or entirely absent. In parts of Eastern Europe, caves stretch for kilometres under agricultural fields, their presence unsuspected until a sinkhole opens or a well strikes an underground void. Similarly, in North America's Midwest, enormous cave networks lie quietly beneath farmland and towns, invisible unless one descends into them. These hidden landscapes remind us that karst is often more extensive than we realise, its true scale concealed beneath ordinary surfaces. Remote karst is not just a matter of geography, it is also a matter of access. Many underwater caves remain unexplored simply because diving to such depth is perilous. Polar karst is difficult to study due to extreme conditions, while desert karst may be buried beneath layers of shifting sand. Even in well-populated regions, the full extent of underground networks is rarely mapped. For scientists, these places are frontiers as daunting as outer space, offering discoveries with every expedition but demanding skill and caution. What unites all these hidden variants is their capacity to surprise. Karst is often imagined as something belonging to lush valleys or dramatic cliffs, but in reality, it adapts to almost any setting. Whether under ice, sea or desert, it continues its quiet work, carving voids, sculpting passages and storing water. These remote landscapes remind us that Earth's geology is not confined to what we see on the surface. Much lies concealed, waiting to be uncovered. For those who do explore them, the experience is often transformative. Divers emerging from a blue hole speak of floating through another world, where silence and stillness reign supreme. Scientists studying polar karst describe the eerie beauty of ice-choked caves that sparkle in torchlight. Adventurers crossing the Nullarbor recall the thrill of discovering lakes hidden far beneath an arid plain. Each encounter is a reminder that the most extraordinary places are often those least expected. In the grand story of Karst, these remote or hidden variants serve as chapters of intrigue. They stretch the definition of what karst can be, proving that the interaction of water and soluble rock is not limited by climate or location. They also remind us that wonder often lies in the unseen, the overlooked, and the difficult to reach. To imagine karst only in its most famous forms is to miss much of its richness. The world beneath ice sheets, under desert sands, or within the sea holds landscapes every bit as remarkable as the towers of Gilin or the caves of Kentucky. Landscapes that remain quiet, waiting for discovery. Karst landscapes are not only physical spaces but also vast canvases for human imagination. Their hidden rivers, sudden voids, and echoing chambers invite reflection and metaphor in ways that gentler terrains rarely do. Where rolling plains evoke comfort and stability, and fertile valleys suggest abundance, karst hints at mystery, uncertainty, and the unseen. It is little wonder that across cultures and centuries, these landscapes have been woven into symbolism, philosophy, and artistic thought. At the most immediate level, caves in karst have long symbolized the unknown. They are dark, silent, and often seemingly endless, qualities that lend themselves easily to metaphor. Plato's famous allegory of the cave is perhaps the best-known philosophical use of subterranean imagery. For him, the cave was not merely a physical space but a metaphor for ignorance, where people mistake shadows for reality until they emerge into the light of knowledge. Though Plato's cave was not tied to a specific karst location, the imagery reflects the real human experience of venturing underground, where perception is limited and truth seems elusive. The metaphor resonates precisely because caves provoke such disorientation. Karst also lends itself to reflections on time. Stalactites and stalagmites grow at a pace barely measurable in a human lifetime, yet in their slow, drip-by-drip accumulation, they form magnificent cathedrals of stone. To stand in a karst cavern is to be confronted by time on a geological scale, time that dwarfs human history. Writers and thinkers have often drawn upon this image to reflect on patience, endurance, and the limits of human perspective. A single drop of water is nothing, but over thousands of years it carves landscapes. The metaphor is irresistible. Persistence, however small, reshapes the world. The vanishing rivers of karst also stir the imagination. A river that plunges underground only to reappear elsewhere suggests journeys hidden from view, transformations in secret, or the idea that what disappears is not lost but merely unseen. Such imagery has been used in literature and folklore to symbolize the soul's journey, hidden emotions, or the mysteries of destiny. The Ljubljanica River in Slovenia, famous for vanishing and resurfacing multiple times, became a powerful symbol in local tradition, its erratic path likened to the unpredictability of life. In poetry, disappearing rivers often stand for suppressed feelings or hidden truths that eventually surface again. Sinkholes with their sudden collapses embody fragility and impermanence. For many, they are stark reminders that the ground beneath us is never entirely secure. Metaphorically, they have been used to describe moments when certainty vanishes, when the structures of life collapse unexpectedly. Philosophers and poets alike have likened them to the human condition, outwardly stable yet always carrying the possibility of sudden change. In this way, Karst landscapes reflect existential truths, that stability is often an illusion, and that the unseen has the power to alter our lives dramatically. Tower Karst, on the other hand, invites different symbolism. The isolated limestone peaks of Gilin or Halong Bay are often compared to sentinels, guardians rising from the earth. In art and literature, they are symbols of resilience, standing alone while the softer stone around them has eroded away. Their isolation can also represent solitude or spiritual clarity, the idea that true strength comes not from blending in but from enduring alone. Painters and poets in China saw them as places where the boundary between earth and heaven blurred, making them natural metaphors for transcendence and harmony. Karst caves have also been deeply tied to the idea of the underworld in myth and imagination. To step into their depths is to descend into realms beyond life, a theme found from Greek Hades to Maya Xibalba. The cave mouth is often seen as a threshold, a liminal space where the world of the living touches that of the dead or the divine. Even outside of explicit religious contexts, writers have drawn on caves as symbols of inner journeys, explorations of the subconscious, the unknown parts of the self, or the trials one must face to achieve transformation. Carl Jung, for instance, often described caves as archetypal spaces representing the unconscious mind. In literature, Karst has often served as a backdrop for reflection on mystery and awe. Romantic poets delighted in describing cavernous voids and subterranean rivers as embodiments of the sublime, experiences that overwhelm the senses with both beauty and terror. For them, standing at the entrance of a vast cave or looking into a yawning sinkhole was to confront nature's power and one's own smallness. This sense of awe, bordering on fear, became a cornerstone of romantic philosophy, and Karst provided the perfect material expression of it. Karst's role in imagination is not limited to grand metaphors. It has also been used symbolically in more intimate ways. The slow growth of calcite formations has been compared to the accumulation of memory, the way experiences drip one by one into the chambers of the mind until they form something enduring. Underground rivers have been likened to subconscious thoughts, flowing unseen until they emerge in dreams or sudden insights. Even the strange pale creatures of caves have entered cultural symbolism, representing adaptation, hidden resilience, or the ability to thrive in darkness. Artists too have long found in Karst a ready source of metaphor. The interplay of light and shadow in caves mirrors the interplay of clarity and obscurity in human thought. The sharp contrasts of tower Karst landscapes suggest strength amidst fragility. The textures of limestone, rough yet sculpted, evoke ideas of endurance shaped by hardship. Sculptors have borrowed these themes, painting them in stone, while photographers revel in the challenge of capturing vast underground chambers in a single frame, balancing light and darkness as carefully as poets balance words. Philosophically, Karst prompts reflection on what is hidden versus what is revealed. Much of the Karst world lies underground, invisible to casual observation. What we see on the surface, a hill, a spring, a sinkhole, is only part of a vast hidden system. This mirrors human existence in countless ways. The surface of our lives is only the visible fraction, while most of our thoughts, emotions, and histories remain concealed. The metaphor of Karst as the unseen depths of the psyche or of society is one that recurs again and again. Culturally, Karst landscapes often symbolize thresholds and transitions. The cave mouth is a gateway, the sinkhole a rupture, the spring a sudden revelation. These symbols appear in myth, in art, and in personal reflection. They remind us that life itself is full of thresholds, moments where the familiar ends and the unknown begins. The enduring fascination with karst is not only about the shapes of stone, but about the ideas they conjure: transformation, impermanence, hidden depth, and the interplay of fragility and resilience. In all these ways, karst serves as a mirror for human imagination. It gives us metaphors for patience and collapse, for hidden journeys and sudden revelations, for solitude and transcendence. Whether carved into philosophy by Plato, painted into scrolls by Chinese artists, or woven into local folklore by villagers who lived above disappearing rivers, karst has always been more than geology. It has been a source of symbolism as deep and varied as the caves themselves. To reflect on karst is to reflect on ourselves, our fears of instability, our wonder at time's vastness, our reverence for mystery, and our desire to find meaning in landscapes that both sustain and unsettle us. These landscapes of stone and silence, carved by water's patient hand, continue to speak not only to science, but also to the imagination, reminding us that every cavern, every sinkhole, every solitary tower is also a metaphor waiting to be read. The landscapes of karst, shaped by the slow drip of water and the quiet persistence of chemistry, have already endured for millions of years. Towers of limestone have risen as softer rock around them eroded away. Vast caverns have stretched into darkness beneath hills and valleys, and rivers have vanished into the earth only to re-emerge elsewhere in surprising places. If they have survived so long, it may be tempting to imagine that they will continue unchanged far into the future. Yet the centuries to come will bring both endurance and transformation, for these landscapes are not frozen in time. They are dynamic, fragile, and constantly evolving, and they will meet new challenges in the age of humanity. One of the most immediate forces shaping their future is climate change. Altered rainfall patterns will affect karst hydrology profoundly. In some places, heavier rains will overwhelm underground channels, producing more frequent floods in valleys and poules. Farmers who once relied on predictable cycles may find the rhythm shifting, their fields inundated or parched without warning. In other regions, prolonged droughts will drain aquifers, silencing springs that have flowed for centuries. Water, always the architect of karst, will continue to sculpt, but its patterns will grow less predictable, creating uncertainty for both landscapes and the people who depend on them. Glaciers, which feed many high-altitude karst systems, are retreating rapidly. As they vanish, the flow of meltwater into alpine caves and aquifers will diminish, altering underground rivers that have run for millennia. Ice caves, with their shimmering frozen stalactites, are already shrinking, erasing natural archives of past climates in the process. The loss is not only visual, but scientific, for these caves store records of atmospheric history locked in ice. The karst of the high mountains, once fed by glacial rhythms, will be reshaped as warming alters the balance of water, stone, and time. Coastal karst will face rising seas. Places like Halong Bay in Vietnam or the limestone islands of the Mediterranean may endure higher tides and stronger storms. Some caves that are now open to visitors could be flooded, their chambers preserved only for divers willing to explore underwater. New blue holes and submerged cave systems may form as sea levels rise further, expanding the world of underwater karst. Yet erosion from waves, combined with human pressure from tourism and development, may also hasten the collapse of delicate formations. The coastlines of karst will continue to change, but not always gently. Urban expansion poses another layer of risk. As cities grow, they often spread over karst terrain, attracted by springs and flat plateaus. Yet building on such land is precarious. Sinkholes can swallow infrastructure overnight, while underground voids compromise foundations. Engineers will undoubtedly refine techniques to detect and stabilize karst beneath construction sites, but the tension will remain. The question is not whether cities can build on karst, but whether they can do so sustainably, balancing the demands of a modern life with the vulnerabilities of stone. The future of karst will also be shaped by how we treat its hidden waters. Karst aquifers are among the most important freshwater resources in the world. Yet they are notoriously fragile. Pollution spreads rapidly through their open channels, and over-extraction can collapse underground systems. In the coming centuries, as water scarcity becomes more pressing globally, karst aquifers will be both treasure and temptation. Protecting them will require foresight, careful management, and respect for the limits of nature. Where such stewardship is practiced, karst waters may sustain millions. Where it is ignored, aquifers may fail, leaving once thriving regions parched. Tourism will remain both a blessing and a challenge. Caves and cliffs will continue to attract visitors, eager to experience the surreal beauty of karst firsthand. Technology may make exploration easier, with lighting, walkways, and even virtual tours expanding access. Yet with every visitor comes impact, the subtle warming of breath, the growth of algae in artificial light, the wear of countless footsteps. Future management may rely on stricter controls, rotating access, or advanced systems to preserve delicate formations. Perhaps some of the most fragile caves will be closed entirely, their beauty left to silence again. Others may embrace controlled visitation, turning education into protection by showing visitors the fragility as well as the wonder. Yet while human activity looms large, natural processes will not cease. Towers will crumble, sinkholes will form, and underground rivers will carve new paths. In geological terms, entire valleys may collapse into vast dolines, while new polges appear in regions now unscarred. In coastal zones, limestone cliffs will retreat steadily under the assault of waves. In arid landscapes, dormant karst may awaken during wetter climatic cycles, reactivating caves that have been dry for thousands of years. These transformations will unfold slowly on the scale of human life, but swiftly on the scale of geology, continuing the endless dialogue between water and stone. Some changes will be subtle, yet profound. A spring that has flowed since ancient times may dry up. A cave formation that has glittered for millennia may collapse in an instant. Over the centuries, such small shifts will accumulate, reshaping the landscapes we know today into forms that would be unfamiliar to future generations. And yet, at the same time, much will remain recognizable. The great towers of Guilin, the vastness of Mammoth Cave, the haunting sinkholes of China and Mexico. These features will persist, enduring long beyond the lifespan of civilizations. They may look different, weathered or eroded, but their essential grandeur will remain. The imagination of the future will also be influenced by these landscapes. As they change, so too will the stories told about them. Legends may evolve to reflect new realities. Springs once sacred may be remembered only in tales of their disappearance, while new sinkholes may spark fresh myths of gods or spirits. Literature, art and philosophy will continue to draw from karst as metaphor, its hidden depths and sudden collapses lending themselves to reflection on uncertainty, resilience, and time. Just as Plato once used a cave to explain knowledge, thinkers of the future may use karst to illustrate humanity's relationship with the unseen or the unpredictable. Technology may even expand our access to karst in ways unimagined. Subterranean mapping using drones and advanced sensors could reveal entire networks that remain hidden today. Virtual reality might allow people to explore fragile caves without setting foot inside them, preserving delicate ecosystems while still sharing their beauty. Scientists may discover new species adapted to darkness, or new chemical processes occurring in the depths of limestone caverns. The future of karst is not only about erosion and collapse, but also about discovery, as these landscapes continue to surprise us. The ultimate fate of karst depends on a balance, the natural persistence of geology set against the accelerating pace of human change. Water will keep dissolving stone, no matter what we do. Towers will rise and fall, caverns will open and close, and rivers will vanish and reappear. That much is certain. What remains uncertain is how human choices will accelerate, interrupt, or redirect these processes. With respect and care, Karst can endure as a source of beauty, inspiration, and life-giving water. With neglect, it can be damaged beyond repair, its delicate systems unravelling in decades rather than millennia. Looking forward, Karst landscapes remind us of endurance, fragility, and the interconnection of nature and culture. They are a testament to the power of small forces, drops of water, grains of soil, roots of plants, to shape entire worlds over time. They are also a reminder of our own role in shaping the future, whether through stewardship or exploitation. The centuries to come will not erase Karst, but they will write new chapters in its story, chapters in which humanity plays an outsized role. In the end, Karst will remain landscapes of stone and silence, but also of change and renewal. They will continue to inspire awe, challenge survival, and provoke imagination, just as they have for thousands of years. Whether they endure as treasures of the natural world or as warnings of fragility depends on us. The question for the future is simple but profound. Will we learn to live with Karst in harmony, or will we leave behind scars that time itself cannot fully heal? Silence has a geography of its own. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the realms of stone, where water has hollowed out chambers, carved away valleys, and left behind landscapes that invite contemplation. Karst, with its hidden rivers, sudden sinkholes, and towers rising against the sky, is more than a physical phenomenon. It is a geography of absence, of spaces shaped as much by what has been removed as by what remains. To walk through such a place is to listen to the language of stillness, to be reminded that emptiness has form, and that silence can be as powerful as sound. These landscapes, born of dissolution, seem always to hold their breath. A sinkhole does not shout as it opens, though the collapse may be catastrophic. Underground rivers rush unseen, their music muffled by rock. Stalactites grow in complete quiet, adding imperceptible layers one drop at a time. In such places one becomes aware of time as something vast and patient, measured not in days or years but in millennia. Silence here is not merely the absence of noise, it is the presence of time itself, condensed into stone and water. Karst teaches a paradox, that fragility and resilience coexist. Limestone is easily dissolved, yielding to even weakly acidic rain, yet the structures that form are enduring. Towers that outlast mountains of harder rock, caves that persist for millions of years. This duality is echoed in human life. Our own lives too are delicate, shaped by countless small influences, yet what endures from them, memory, art, ideas, can last long beyond our bodies. The silence of Karst becomes a mirror, reflecting the tension between vulnerability and endurance. The solitude of these landscapes has always drawn the human spirit toward reflection. Ancient peoples placed their myths in caves and springs, imagining them as entrances to underworlds or realms of gods. Artists and poets saw in their shadows metaphors for mystery and transcendence. Today, visitors still enter Karst landscapes seeking more than spectacle. They are moved by the hush of vast chambers, the sudden stillness of a cliff rising above mist, the quiet gurgle of a spring in the forest. Silence here is not emptiness but fullness, a presence that encourages thought and imagination. Even the dangers of Karst speak in whispers rather than roars. Floodwaters rise silently underground before bursting into springs. Pollutants seep invisibly into aquifers, spreading without trace. Subsidence creeps gradually, foundations sagging before collapse. The hazards remind us that silence can be deceptive, concealing forces at work just beyond perception. Yet even these risks deepen the sense of respect such landscapes command. To live in Karst country is to live with humility, knowing that the unseen shapes the surface and that silence is never truly still. Philosophers and poets have long leaned on caves as metaphors for the hidden and the unknown, but in Karst the metaphor expands to the whole landscape. The surface may look ordinary, a meadow, a forest, a hillside, but beneath lies a complex, unseen world. What appears simple hides complexity, just as in people or societies. The geography of silence asks us to look deeper, to recognise that what is not visible may be just as important as what is on the surface. This quality of concealment makes karst landscapes uniquely meditative. To stand at the entrance of a vast cavern, or to float across a still karst lake, is to feel the weight of what cannot be seen. The hidden rivers and chambers speak not through noise but through presence, reminding us that reality extends beyond perception. In an age filled with constant noise and distraction, karst invites stillness, offering spaces where silence itself becomes a guide. Water, the sculptor of karst, also speaks in quiet tones. A single droplet falling from a stalactite echoes like a bell in a chamber that has stood silent for thousands of years. A spring bubbling at the edge of a forest murmurs of journeys through stone, unseen but real. Rivers that vanish underground remind us that life is filled with disappearances, but also with reappearances, the return of what was thought lost. The silence of water in karst is not absolute but rhythmic, a reminder that even in stillness change is constant. The human imagination has always responded to these qualities. From Plato's allegory of the cave to Chinese poets writing of misty limestone towers, karst has been a canvas for thinking about truth, time, and transformation. In the modern world, scientists trace underground rivers with dyes and sensors, explorers map vast caverns, and conservationists work to protect fragile aquifers. Yet beneath all the measurements and management, the enduring impression remains the same. These are landscapes where silence dominates, and in that silence we find meaning. There is also a lesson of humility in the geography of silence. Karst is unpredictable. Sinkholes open where none were expected. Springs shift course without warning. Caves collapse after standing for eons. These events remind us that silence is not safety, that power often lies unseen. At the same time, they remind us that much of what sustains life is hidden. Karst aquifers, though invisible, provide water to hundreds of millions of people. The unseen can nourish as much as it can threaten. Looking forward, these landscapes will continue to change. Climate shifts may silence some springs and awaken others. Rising seas will flood coastal caves, creating new underwater worlds. Towers may crumble while new voids form, yet through it all, the geography of silence will endure. It is not a static silence, but a living one, shaped by time and transformation. For those who seek reflection, karst will always offer places where the earth seems to pause, where sound is replaced by presence, and where silence becomes its own geography. To meditate on karst is to meditate on patience. Every stalactite is a lesson in persistence, every vanished river a reminder of impermanence. The silence of stone is the silence of deep time, inviting us to consider our place within it. Human history is but a moment compared to the ages recorded in limestone layers, yet in that moment we have painted caves, told stories, and drawn meaning from the quiet of these places. The geography of silence is not just natural but cultural, connecting the endurance of stone with the creativity of the human spirit. In the end, karst landscapes remain both mystery and teacher. They show us that emptiness can be form, that silence can be profound, and that fragility and resilience are two sides of the same stone. They remind us that beauty often lies not in noise or spectacle, but in patience, in shadow, and in the quiet persistence of water over time. To step into these landscapes is to step into a world where silence reigns, and to realise that silence has a geography as rich and meaningful as any sound. As we arrive at the close of this long wandering through landscapes of stone and silence, it feels fitting to return to the gentle pace with which we began. Karst, with all its mysteries, hazards and wonders, is not a story that ends neatly. It is a story still unfolding, one that stretches backward into deep time and forward into futures we cannot yet see. What we have traced together is only part of its journey. The patience of water, the fragility of limestone, the creativity of human imagination, and the enduring silence that ties them all together. There is something humbling in knowing that these landscapes existed long before us and will endure long after. The towers of Guilin, the vast chambers of Mammoth Cave, the glittering cenotes of the Yucatan, each is a moment in a process that began millions of years ago. They remind us that change can be slow yet unstoppable, and that the world beneath our feet is never truly fixed. Just as rivers carve their way through stone, time carves its way through civilizations, reshaping them quietly and continuously. Karst is, in many ways, a geography of patience. Every stalactite is a reminder that beauty is built one drop at a time, invisible until thousands of years have passed. Every sinkhole is proof that even stability has limits, that permanence is an illusion. And every underground river is a metaphor for the unseen forces that sustain us, flowing quietly out of sight but essential to life. To spend time with Karst is to spend time with patience, with processes that are larger than ourselves, and rhythms that will continue whether we notice them or not. There is also a quiet generosity to these landscapes. Despite their unpredictability, they have given humanity water, shelter, and inspiration. Springs from karst aquifers have quenched the thirst of countless generations, caves have served as refuge in times of danger, and limestone has built our cities and monuments. Artists have turned their silhouettes into poetry, and storytellers have placed their myths in the shadows of their chambers. The gifts of karst are not loud or flamboyant. They are subtle, like the drip of water in a cave, yet they are no less profound for their subtlety. What makes karst particularly moving is its silence. In a world filled with constant noise, karst invites stillness. It reminds us that not all landscapes shout their presence. Some whisper, some conceal more than they reveal. Some teach us that what is invisible can be just as important as what is on the surface. The silence of karst is not empty but full of time, full of change, full of meaning. To listen to that silence is to hear something deeper than sound, and perhaps this is why karst endures not just physically, but emotionally. It has a way of settling into the imagination, of staying with those who experience it, a traveller who drifts down the Lee River, who peers into the depths of a cenote, or who stands in the echoing darkness of a great cavern rarely forgets the feeling. It is not only the sight that remains, but the sense of scale, of mystery, of connection to something older and larger than oneself. Karst landscapes endure not only in stone but in memory. When we reflect on these landscapes, we also reflect on ourselves. The persistence of water against stone is not so different from the persistence of human hope or creativity. The hidden chambers of caves mirror the hidden depths of thought and feeling. The sudden collapse of a sinkhole reflects the fragility of our own structures, the way change can come without warning. In this sense, karst is more than geology. It is philosophy written into the land, an endless reminder of patience, impermanence, and resilience. Looking toward the future, the question is not whether karst will survive, but in what form. Towers may crumble, caves may flood, springs may shift, but the processes that created them will continue. Water will keep moving through stone, carving, dissolving, reshaping. Karst will endure, though perhaps differently than it does today. And in that endurance lies reassurance. The earth is never static, yet its rhythms continue. As we part from this journey, it is worth carrying with us a sense of that rhythm. Just as landscapes of stone are shaped by water drop by drop, so too are our own lives shaped by small, patient forces. We often think of change as sudden, dramatic, and noisy, but in truth, much of what transforms us happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, until we look back and see that we too have been reshaped by time. The geography of silence is not confined to the earth. It is written in us as well. There is comfort in letting our thoughts drift with that awareness. Imagine your mind as a river, sometimes rushing, sometimes disappearing underground, sometimes re-emerging brighter and stronger. Imagine your memories as stalactites, built slowly over time until they create chambers rich with story. Imagine your challenges as limestone, seemingly solid yet always subject to change when persistence is applied. In this way, the metaphors of Karst become companions, guiding reflections in quiet moments. At night, when the world grows still, it is easy to picture yourself among these landscapes. Perhaps you stand at the edge of a sinkhole gazing into shadow. Perhaps you walk through a cavern where each drip of water marks the passage of centuries. Perhaps you float across a river valley at dawn, towers rising through the mist. In each image, the theme is the same: silence, patience, transformation. These are the gifts of Karst, both to the earth and to the imagination. So as you settle into rest, let your thoughts meander as rivers do, vanishing and reappearing, carving gentle paths through the landscapes of your own mind. Let them slow, like the drip of water that forms a stalactite, each one adding a quiet layer to the chambers of memory. Let them drift, like mist around limestone peaks, dissolving into calm. In this way, the story of Karst becomes a story of rest, a reminder that silence itself can be sustaining. Karst has no final chapter. Its story is always ongoing, written in stone and water across timescales longer than our own. But tonight, as our journey comes to a close, we can pause here, in this geography of silence, and simply listen. The caves will continue to echo, the rivers will continue to flow, the towers will continue to rise and fall. And we, for a moment, can be still within it. May these landscapes linger with you not as noise, but as calm, enduring presences that remind us of patience, of fragility, and of resilience. And as you drift now into sleep, may your dreams be shaped as gently as stone is shaped by water, slowly, quietly, beautifully, across the geography of silence.